What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. 12 Saw Chapter 281. It's time to leave advertisement. Karen's words are extremely contagious and stirring. Bullet looked at Karen blankly. After a moment of silence, the smile on his lips could hardly be suppressed. His background as a soldier since he was a child makes it easier for him to accept this situation full of challenges and uncertainties. Being abandoned, betrayed, and then rebelling, these experiences have been deeply ingrained in his bones. He doesn't want to be bound, and he doesn't want to fight for anyone or any flag anymore. He only lives for himself. Challenge is his life, and the strong is his only respect. Karen's words undoubtedly aroused the deepest desire in his heart. Become stronger, transcend all constraints, surpass all previous heroes and strong men, and stand at the top of the world. Are you so confident? Bullet showed his iconic smile again, his white teeth curled up in an arc. If you fail, you will die. Karen didn't speak anymore, he took a step forward. Boom! In an instant, conquerors held nothing back. A strong air current swept across, black and purple lightning kept jumping in the air, and the temperature in the air seemed to rise sharply. This is a much more powerful conquerors than before. This sense of oppression makes even the famous pirates unable to help but tremble. I've only seen this conquerors in one person, Rocks. Damn, is he really Marine? The prisoners stared unblinkingly at the conqueror's vortex. Some of their faces were pale, some of their bodies were tense, and some even began to moan softly. Their mental and physical limits were being challenged mercilessly. A trace of hot fighting spirit flashed in Bullet's eyes. He was not afraid, but instead a provocative flame burned brightly in his chest. His body seemed to be shaking slightly due to the air pressure, but he always maintained the fearless smile on his face. This is so true. A trace of fanaticism flashed in Bullet's eyes, and the conquerors in his body stirred slightly under the restraints of the sea tower stone. However, it was this suppressed desire that made him even more eager for a battle to break through himself. It was as if he could hear the sound of bones rubbing against his clenched fists. Every nerve in him was burning, and every drop of blood was shouting for challenge. At this moment, he couldn't wait to have a fight with Karen. Advertisement, crack. Under this strong impact, the ceiling shook and cracks spread rapidly, as if the entire cell was about to be torn apart by this compressive force. The originally lifeless environment suddenly became oppressive and distorted, and it seemed that even the space was subtly deformed by the impact of this airflow. An almost suffocating sense of oppression began to fill the air, and even the pirates who were used to extreme environments couldn't help but feel chills. Some people covered their ears, trying to resist the heavy airwaves coming from the depths. But at this moment, everyone in the entire cell could feel how small they looked in front of that force. At the same time, the floor of the cell began to shake violently, the cracks on the walls expanded, and some places even began to crack. Even more ingeniously, the collapse of the ground and walls is limited to Bullet's cell. The cells of other prisoners were not affected at all. Such is Karen's precise control over conquerors. It wasn't until the first piece of ceiling fell that Karen stopped exerting pressure. Conqueror's airflow suddenly dispersed and gradually disappeared into the air. Then, a white light appeared in Bullet's cell, as well as bursts of snowflakes. That floated over from the 5th floor, freezing hell. Karen's sadistic conquerors actually tore apart the barrier between the 6th and 5th level cages. Bullet looked at the snowflakes floating in his cell and felt the cold current coming from the 5th floor of the freezing hell. A trace of surprise and yearning for freedom flashed in his eyes. Magellan looked at Bullet's prison and was about to cry. The funds to repair the 1st to 4th floors have not yet been approved, and now cracks have appeared on the 5th and 6th floors. Who said Karen is the hero of Impel? This Karen is simply the bane of Impel. I hope Warring States Fleet Admiral can bear it. Warden Magellan, please open his shackles. After Karen ordered, he shook his head again, took out the Zhangfeng in his hand, and said calmly. Forget it. I'll do it myself. As soon as he finished speaking, the sea tower stone shackles restraining Bullet broke. Bullet's arms were freed instantly, and the heavy shackles fell in the air with a crisp impact. Without any hesitation, he pulled his arms hard, as if he wanted to completely get rid of the restraints and feel the long-lost sense of freedom. Aren't you afraid that I will rebel? Bullet turned to look at Karen, with a dangerous glint in his eyes, but without the hostile anger. On the contrary, it is. A kind of excitement of fighting. Advertisement. Karen smiled slightly, not feeling nervous at all. He waved his hand gently, his eyes full of confidence and even a hint of joking. You can rebel if you want, but don't forget, I gave you freedom, and you are willing to pay the price for my rules and challenges, right? Bullet was stunned for a moment, and the desire to challenge seemed to be ignited even more intensely. Marine. Bullet walked forward slowly, his legs firmly stepping on the broken ground, and his steps were firm. You are strong, even stronger than I thought. There was no hypocrisy or contempt in his tone, just a longing that had been missing for a long time. Challenge the strong, surpass the strong, break all the shackles. But you're still a little short of that. Bullet suddenly accelerated and rushed towards Karen. Although he moved quickly, he did not want to take action immediately, but stopped in front of Karen. Karen didn't react immediately. he looked into Bullet's eyes quietly, as if waiting for something. At that moment, the tension in the air seemed to reach its extreme. "May I have your name? You can call me Karen?" "This is not a good place to fight, Karen." Bullet said these words slowly, with a fierce fighting spirit in his eyes. Karen raised his eyebrows slightly. He was indeed a soldier. Rather than fighting, he longed for a hearty battle. The more he looked at Bullet, the more satisfied he became. "You're right," Karen responded calmly, "this is not the place you want to fight. I think it's time to leave, Warden Magellan." Magellan wiped his cold sweat, hurried to Karen's side, and said in a panic. "Yes, General Black Tiger, Chapter 282. The tiger comes out of the cage." Advertisement Malinfondo, Fleet Admiral Office. While Warring States was processing documents, he held the phone bug and listened to the communication on the other end of the phone. "That's it, Fleet Admiral, Black Tiger Admiral has left with Douglas Bullet," Magellan said very seriously. Warring States' pen tip paused on the paper, staring at the document expressionlessly, and then nodded slowly. Calmness and determination are his usual style, but at this moment, there are still some waves in his heart. That's a scary guy called the Devil's Descendant. He no longer has time to think about whether what Karen did was right or not. The beast has been released. He only hopes that Karen is really strong enough to suppress Douglas Bullet and let him be used by Marine. "Okay, I understand." Warring States' voice was low and calm, appearing extremely clear and decisive. "One more thing." Magellan on the other end of the phone hesitated and said. Warring States reorganized the information and asked casually. "What's up? Imper's repair funding. Don't worry, I've already made arrangements. I believe it won't take long." Ahem. That's it. When General Black Tiger took away Douglas Bullet, he shattered the barriers on the 5th and 6th floors, so Impel still needs some funds. Warring States' expression froze, and the pen tip paused on the document for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and looked up at the sea outside the window. After a moment of silence, he responded calmly. "Okay, got it." After the phone bug hangs up, he gently rubbed his eyebrows, trying to alleviate the chaotic thoughts in his mind. Ever since he became a fleet admiral, he has experienced work pressure and complicated decisions, and he has truly felt the pressure on his body. As he learned more about it, he even felt an indescribable confusion and worry in his heart. Now, he is responsible for the fate of the entire Marine, and the weight of this responsibility has made him feel a little tired. "Karen, I hope you won't disappoint me." The first half of the Grand Line. A lonely island stands among the waves. The island is surrounded by endless sea water. The intersection of the sky and the sea seems to be an eternal boundary. Boom. Advertisement. At this moment, a huge roar exploded in the air. The sky was suddenly shrouded in black clouds, a violent storm suddenly hit, and huge waves were set off on the sea. Around the island, the seawater fights against each other, causing violent ripples. Energy fluctuations capable of destroying everything vibrated in the center of the island. The surrounding rocks were so fragile in the face of this force that they instantly shattered into pieces. Even the trees and vegetation on the island were destroyed in an instant and turned into fly ash. Then the debris in the sky continued to arrange, reorganize, and combine in the air. A giant made of trees, rocks and debris rose from the ground, and the island under its feet seemed to begin to shake under the influence of this huge force. The entire island was about to be torn apart by this sudden force. This giant is 100 meters tall, has a huge body, and is composed of various natural elements. Huge trunks and branches intertwined into its limbs. Fragments of rock embedded in its back, huge shards covered its chest and shoulders in a shell as hard as steel. Paramecia, fusion fruit, fruit awakening. The awakened fusion fruit is very powerful. He can use the surrounding ruins, nature, and even enemy weapons to form any object he wants. The explosive birth of the giant just now was due to him using the ability of the fusion fruit to completely fuse the rocks and trees on the surrounding islands to create this behemoth. Bullet looked down at Karen, the fighting spirit burning in his eyes. "Has the devil fruit awakened?" Karen calmly looked at Bullet, who was getting taller and taller. In the later stages of the plot, there were only two abilities to assess the strength of a strong person. One was Conqueror's Entanglement, and the other was Devil Fruit Awakening. Bullet is now young and at the peak of his strength. To be honest, even Karen felt pressure when facing him. "Come on, Karen, beat me." A huge sound roared in the air, echoing throughout the island. There was no slight in Bullet's eyes because of the size of both sides. He already knew in Impel Prison that Karen was definitely an opponent worthy of his full strength. Karen took a deep breath and pulled out the Tibetan Fung. A trace of solemnity flashed in his eyes. He must win this battle, and win easily. Only in this way can Bullet completely surrender. In this way, he is the dominant one in the relationship between the two parties. Thinking of this, he no longer held back, and passionate music suddenly sounded. Conqueror's was fully expanded with him as the center, and lightning drawn with black and purple energy jumped in the air. His body became more symmetrical. Black aura spread throughout his body, and a pair of huge black wings that could cover everything quietly unfolded behind him. The strong wind roared, and the seawater that caused all the waves on the edge of the island instantly turned into solid ice. Advertisement. This time, he directly used all the power of Gu Huoniao. To win, you must win beautifully. Bullet looked at Karen blankly, feeling the energy fluctuations around Karen's body, and couldn't help but feel surprised in his heart. This guy who looked younger than him had much more domineering power than he had imagined. However, he will not admit defeat. You are indeed an opponent worth fighting. Bullet had a big smile on his face and his eyes were bright. His huge body leaned forward slightly, and the island under his feet seemed unable to withstand the force as it vibrated, but he stood as still as a mountain. Karen didn't respond, just stared at him deeply, the black wings spread out, and the strong airflow violently collided at the wingtips. Come on, let me see your limits. Karen's voice was low, and his eyes flashed with endless fighting spirit. There is no need for words between strong men, oh. Bullet chuckled, his huge body suddenly shook, and then a powerful aura erupted from his body. The surrounding rocks began to shatter on their own, and the rock fragments flew in the air, as if guided by some kind of attraction. As this power unfolded, his giant made of trees and rocks became huge again, and every piece of his body was constantly changing, forming a stronger and sharper weapon. Broken for me! Bullet roared, and the giant suddenly waved his arms and rushed towards Karen. The power of that blow was like a mountain collapsing and the ground cracking, and the airflow even contained the roar of thunder. Karen didn't hesitate at all, stepped hard on his feet, quickly rose into the air, spread his black wings, and rushed towards Bullet with terrifying speed. The two forces collided in the air, causing the air to vibrate, and a strong wave of air instantly erupted. The surrounding islands were affected by this force, rock fragments flew away, and the waves rolled violently. God avoids. Karen suddenly swung his sword, and the hidden-edged sword carried the powerful conqueror's aura, and a black lightning sword energy like thunder rose into the sky. The sword energy tore through all obstacles in the air, approaching Bullet's giant. Listening to this familiar move, Bullet was in a trance, and Karen's face gradually merged with the image of Roger in his memory. His expression darkened, and he waved his huge arm made of rock, trying to block the blow. However, when the black sword energy struck, he realized that his defense was like paper and could not withstand Karen's attack at all. Roger. Bang. The sword energy instantly bombarded Bullet's rock giant, and the strong explosion was deafening. The surrounding air seemed to be compressed into a huge bubble, and a strong airwave was formed at the moment of the explosion. Rock fragments flew in all directions, and Bullet's huge body fell like a collapsed mountain. Advertisement Chapter 283 Almost a little bit advertisement. Hey, Monet, is the sugar ready yet? The port of Marinefondo. Smoker rode a motorcycle that kept roaring at the port. White smoke spread across his body and flowed along the tires of the motorcycle to the ground, leaving a row of clear traces. The sea breeze, mixed with the smell of salt and moisture, blew hard on Smoker's face. At this time, Smoker seemed high-spirited. Since becoming Karen's adjutant, both his strength and status in Marine have been qualitatively improved. After all, the general's adjutant can't just be Lieutenant Colonel Ichiko. So, Smoker became a major general. Compared with him in the plot, he was just a colonel when he first appeared, which is 2 levels higher. A full 15 years of precipitation are missing. The motorcycle slid quickly past the piles of cargo to be unloaded, and the tires made a harsh friction sound against the ground. Smoker made a beautiful drift and stopped beside Monet. A puff of snow-white smoke came out of his mouth. Oh, woman, it's really troublesome. As he spoke, he pressed a button on the body of the motorcycle, and the motorcycle instantly turned into a delicate capsule. He put the capsule in his arms and shook his hair. Monet glanced at him lightly, not attracted by his arrogance or pretentious behavior. She stretched and said gently, Mr. Smoker, I'm sorry, we do have more things than you do, but we should be able to pack them up soon. As soon as she finished speaking, ZFA's broad body walked out from the end of the dock alley. There were 3 petite girls beside him, Sugar, Uta and Dantata's Princess Manchili. The 4 of them were chatting and laughing, moving happily towards this side carrying large and small bags. As soon as Smoker saw Zephabian, he immediately put away his bohemian expression and exuded a military aura. In front of Zepha, he will always be the recruiter. He was just about to step forward to help Zepha carry his luggage onto the warship when he noticed a fat figure resembling a propeller appearing in the sky. On top of him was a slender woman in a maid's outfit, holding a telescope in one hand and looking around for something. When she saw ZFA's figure, she immediately jumped down from the air. Advertisement Buffalo followed closely, and the 2 of them put the luggage in ZFA's hands on their bodies, and then took off again, over Smoker's head, and flew to the warship anchored in the port of Marinefondo. On the deck of the warship, Tetsolo sat back on the beach chair, staring closely at the 2 figures. Karen and Bullet kept changing positions in the air. Even if he restrained his ability and domineering power, the feeling of punching to the flesh still made Tetsolo's heart tremble. Come again. Bullet became more and more courageous as he fought, paying full attention to Karen's every move. It has been 7 days since the last thrilling battle between the 2. He maintains the habit of being in the Roger Pirates, launching new challenges to Karen every day, and the result of the battle with Roger is almost the same. Facing this Marine who is the same age as him and even a few years younger than him. He never won once, and it failed miserably. After each failure, he became more determined to defeat Karen. Here, Karen looked calm on the outside, but couldn't help but scold her on the inside. Be born. The reason why he chose Bullet was because he wanted him to smooth things over for him and he didn't want to go through the battle. But since Bullet joined his side, he has to face Bullet's challenges almost every day. Karen, who was originally a little flat, once again regained the passion and vitality that she had when she first came into this world. At this time, Karen was really suffering, and she even regretted whether her original choice was the right one. MD, this is not okay. A hint of coldness flashed in Karen's eyes, thinking that from now on he would have to fight Bullet every day, and he wanted to die. You can't do this, you must set a rule with him. Just as he was about to speak, a tiger from Bullet came down the mountain, taking advantage of Karen's distraction and pounced on Karen again. Karen quickly ducked aside. At the fierce moment of the aerial confrontation between the two, Tetsolo looked away from them and slowly stood up from the beach chair. Smoker took Zephyr and his team onto the warship, and all their eyes were attracted to Karen and Bullet. General Zephyr, Tesoro followed Smoker's example and saluted Zephyr. Advertisement: he didn't join Marine, but he knew about Karen's relationship with Zephyr. Zephyr waved his hand, put Uda down from his arms, and rubbed her head. Udalima pulled Sugar and Manchili around and played around in the warship. These days are almost the happiest days for Uda, because there are young ladies playing happily with her every day. Boom. After a loud bang, Bullet lay weakly on the deck. Karen walked over and helped him up. Bullet was breathing heavily, and a trace of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. He grabbed Karen's arm and forced himself to stand up. Enjoyable. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, with a stubborn expression on his face that refused to admit defeat. Come again. Karen shook his head, took a deep breath, suppressed the anxiety and annoyance in his heart, and tried to look calm. He gently let go of Bullet's arm and looked down at him. You have to understand, Karen's voice was slightly tired, the gap between us cannot be bridged simply through one challenge after another. Bullet grinned. Even though there was blood on the corner of his mouth, he still looked very stubborn. I don't care, challenge is a challenge, I will become stronger if I can beat you, it doesn't matter, continue. Karen frowned and couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Yes, he should have thought that people like Bullet are destined not to give up easily, and whether he wants to or not, he will never stop. This persistence makes people love and hate at the same time. Okay, Bullet. Karen finally made up her mind, a trace of determination flashing in her eyes. I need to set a rule. Bullet seemed to notice the difference between Karen and stopped his movements with a look of alertness in his eyes. Rules? Yes, Karen nodded with a firm tone. If you continue like this, you will never be able to get out of this cycle. He paused and continued. If you really want to become stronger, you can no longer challenge me blindly like now. Only when you think you can truly defeat me can you challenge me new. Bullet was stunned for a moment, seeming a little confused, but soon he laughed and said. But I feel like I can beat you every time, just a little bit. Karen. Chapter 284. Is your name Smoker? Advertisement? Karen's mouth twitched slightly, and he really had nothing to say to this fighting maniac. He took a deep breath and looked at Bullet with resentful eyes. After that, it will take at least a week before you can challenge me to a duel. Bullet wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said angrily, Why? I'm stronger than you. Karen raised his fist. Bullet was stunned for a moment, then laughed and said, You are stronger than me, that's why you have to fight every day. Only in this way can I grow. What he said makes sense. Karen looked at the determined Bullet and felt like crying. I don't care. Anyway, you can fight me for at least a week. At other times, you can compete with other strong men on our ship. Karen decided to go rogue. Bullet looked at Tetsolo, who was observing him, and shook his head. He can't do it, he's too weak. Here, Tetsolo didn't realize at all that he was disliked by Bullet. He only felt that he was being topped by a tiger, and his eyes drifted to the side unconsciously. Karen's head was full of black lines and she really wanted to curse. They are all theatrical version of Boss, who is worse than the other. He was stunned when he thought of this, and looked around the warship. The indignant Bullet, the confused Tetsolo, the determined Zephyr, and the confused Uda. This time he discovered that half of the people around him were bosses from the theater version. Even he himself made the finished product by stepping on the Golden Lion. Speaking of which, his other identity is that of the heir to the Golden Lion. The boss in the movie version and I are really destined to be together, and before I knew it, I was surrounded by all kinds of big guys. Karen sighed secretly in his heart. However, Bullet is also saying that Tesoro is indeed much weaker than the future Golden Emperor. But Tesolo is growing very fast. As long as he has enough gold, he believes that Tesolo will be able to grow into the big boss he remembers in a short time. Ahem. What do you know? Although Tetsolo is weak now, I believe that it won't be long before his growth rate will surprise you. Really? Bullet rubbed the back of his head and looked at Tetsolo suspiciously. Advertisement: he really couldn't see the potential in Tetsolo, and he didn't understand why Karen was so sure. Of course, trust me, don't be shocked when the time comes. Seeing Bullet gradually becoming interested in Tetsolo, Karen breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. At this moment, he just wanted to increase Tetsolo's strength quickly so that he could find an opponent for the annoying Bullet. He is not Roger. For him, fighting a few times is enough. At other times, he prefers to fish alone on the deck. When the time comes when your teammates around you are getting stronger, don't fall behind. Companion. Seeing Karen's assurance, Bullet suddenly felt confused in his eyes. In fact, he has always had complicated emotions towards his so-called companions. He grew up on the battlefield. On the battlefield, apart from his own strength, he could only trust his companions and comrades. However, he was betrayed too much by his so-called companions. Every time he mentioned trust, there was an indelible pain in his heart. Every betrayal makes him more determined to become stronger enough to face all challenges alone. But his experience in the Roger Pirates will also gradually make his dusty heart gradually doubtful. The war did not teach him how to get along with the world. Only the strong man at the top could give him a moment of comfort. Now a strong man with the same strength as Roger once again told him the importance of companions, and the seeds in his heart sprouted again. Bullet was a little distracted. Bullet, one person cannot survive in the sea. Everyone has his own destination. Roger, I don't believe that. I only trust my fists. That way, you won't be able to understand the power of guardianship. Really, if companions are really useful, why are you still dying? Ha ha ha, I will not die. There will always be someone who will inherit my will. It doesn't matter. Roger, I'm leaving. From that day on, he once again embarked on a journey alone, but lost his battle goal and began to wreak havoc aimlessly, turning into a helpless monster. Until now. He looked at Karen and saw how similar the divine evasion move was. Just as daunting, just as unstoppable. Bullet shook his head and woke up from his reverie. Karen didn't understand what Bullet was thinking, so when he saw him shaking his head, he thought he was dissatisfied. Suddenly, his eyes were attracted by a man, so he coughed lightly. Advertisement. Actually, we still have a very powerful person in our team. Karen said without changing his expression and his heart not beating. Bullet looked at Karen blankly. Karen coughed lightly, pointed at Smoker who was like a quail next to Zephyr, and said mysteriously. You saw him? Bullet nodded. Ahem, he is actually a recruit from the same class as me. Let's put it this way. I was just a recruit who barely entered the elite training, and he was called Marine's brightest rising star. At this point, Karen did not continue speaking, but just stared into Bullet's eyes. He didn't tell a single lie. You mean, he is stronger than you? Bullet's eyes widened, completely fooled by Karen. Marine is indeed the world's overlord. He thought that Karen's strength had shocked him, but he didn't expect that there was someone braver than Karen. Seeing that Bullet's attention was finally diverted, Karen smiled and said nothing, leaving Bullet with an enigmatic image. I didn't say the rest, Karen thought secretly in her heart. Then, he patted Bullet on the shoulder, turned around and walked in the direction of Zephyr. Bullet hesitated for a while, then followed Karen's footsteps and looked at Smoker. Karen, everyone is already here, do you really don't need other sailors? Zephyr said with a smile, his eyes drifting towards Bullet unconsciously. At this time, Bullet is still wearing a military uniform. If you ignore his eager expression, he will not look out of place even if he is standing in the Marine. It's a good idea, but it's a pity that it went the wrong way. Zephyr sighed in his heart. He had heard about his past from Karen, and sometimes, he couldn't help but imagine in his heart, if Bullet had been in Marine since birth, the ending would be different. After all, I am still forced by this world, but no matter what, he has committed a heinous crime after all, and maybe spending the rest of his life working for Marine can be considered a way back. Withdrawing his gaze, Zephyr looked at Karen again. Here, before Karen spoke, Bullet next to him stared at Smoker and asked in a deep voice. Is your name Smoker? Chapter 285 Plan Advertisement? Ah. Smoker looked at Bullet, pointed to his nose, and nodded. It's me. Marine's brightest new star? Ahem. Smoker glanced at Cullen sideways. If it weren't for Cullen, he would indeed be Marine's most dazzling star, but now Cullen is a Marine hero. So, he nodded again. Very good. Bullet did not continue to speak, still staring at Smoker. Smoker looked confused and was stared at by Bullet. He could always feel that Bullet was exuding vague hostility towards him, as well as the desire for the strong. No need. I will go to New World after collecting Shichibukai. The situation in New World is too complicated. Karen shook her head. I'd better use New World's Marine. Are you sure? That group of Marines is different from the ones here. Most of them are a team that made mistakes in the Marines and were exiled. Compared to the Marines at our headquarters, their military style and military discipline are extremely bad. There is another sentence that Zephyr did not finish, that is, rather than saying they are a group of Marines, they are more like pirates wearing Marine uniforms. Their personalities are inherently bad, and because they have long been looking forward to New World, the pirate paradise, they have long been assimilated by pirates. Sometimes he ignores orders from his headquarters. There will even be many bad actions, such as killing pirates. As for whether there are civilians, Zephyr is not sure. After all, in the New World, except for the participating countries that have the ability to use heavenly gold, the dividing line between pirates and civilians has long been blurred. In the eyes of the outside world and the headquarters, that team is completely composed of a mixture of gangsters, scoundrels, and out-of-control Marines. Almost every action they take in the New World is dancing on the edge, challenging established rules and moral bottom lines. Karen naturally understands Zfa's concerns, but in his heart, this kind of marine is exactly what he needs. The fact that the headquarters looks down upon marine means that their relationship with the headquarters is very poor. There will be more room for maneuver in the middle. For Karen, killing pirates is not a problem, but if they disobey discipline, Karen will let them understand what discipline is. I know, Karen said seriously, but what I need is people who can establish themselves in the New World, and those Marines in the New World, despite their shortcomings, are more adaptable to the living environment there. Advertisement. Although Zepha is still worried, he knows Karen's ability and understands his thoughts. In the New World, conventional rules and order have been subverted. What is needed is not only strength, but also the ability to adapt to the complex and ever-changing environment there. Okay, I will do my best to support your decision. Zepha patted Karen on the shoulder. Aren't you going to meet Guillaume? Karen shook his head and glanced at the bird on his shoulder. No, it's just New World, it's not a big deal, is it? Zepha was stunned and said with a smile. You kid, but yes, I believe you. After a pause, he asked again. Who are you going to start with next? Hearing this, Karen took out the list in his hand. Jorkal Mahawk, Shah Crocodile, Moonlight Moria, Don Quixote Doflamingo, crossed out, Hanaja, Fisher Tiger. In addition to Doflamingo, who was crossed out, he still has 5 candidates. Not to mention Fisher Tiger, he is one of his own people and is still in New World, so he is not in a hurry. The remaining ones are Jorkal Mahawk, Shah Crocodile, Moonlight Moria and Hanaja. All 4 of these people were in paradise during the first half of the Grand Line. According to the route, Krygana Island where Mahawk is located is the closest, followed by Moria. I don't know if he sailed the Thriller bark into the thick foggy sea. If not, I might have to go to West Blue, then there is Crocodile in Alabasta. As for Hanaja, there is too little information about him, and Karen does not know his exact location. Karen only remembered that in the plot, he was defeated by Ace who had just left the sea. Thinking about it, it should be in the first half of the Grand Route. Damn the world government, in order to discuss Karen, they didn't even tell him the most basic information, they just told him a few names. The list was made public. Karen must persuade them as soon as possible not to cause trouble, otherwise during this period, all the evil things done by the 7 warlords of the sea will be forcibly placed on Karen's head. In this way, Karen's little influence and reputation will be damaged. Although Karen didn't care, she just felt very sick. I'm going to go to the Devil's Triangle first, where there are not only Moria but also Mahawk, so we can solve them together. Karen put away the list and looked at Zepha. Zepha nodded. Moria is easy to say, Mahawk's strength should not be underestimated. Advertisement. Karen said calmly. Is he the world's #1 swordsman? He hasn't asked me if I would agree to the Hidden Edge. Zepha thought of the shocking sword strike that day and said with a smile. That's right, why is the pirate called the best swordsman in the world? This title is indeed more suitable for Marine. They both laughed. Then there was silence. After a while, Zepha said, it's time to set off. Yes, it's time to go. Let Uda go with you. Zepha looked at Uda, with a hint of endearment in his eyes. He knew what Karen was going to do in the New World, and was afraid that Jess's tragedy would happen again. What about you? Karen stared at Zepha, still not giving up. But he also knew this was impossible. Zephyr's identity and status determine that it is impossible for him to leave Malinfondo. I'm old, just stay. Zepha sighed and suddenly thought of his old friend, Garp. He has never been angry because his son is the most vicious criminal in the world. Although the two are against each other, Garp often uses Dorag to show off to himself and Sengoku, and his tone is full of appreciation and pride for Dorag. When one day I am completely disappointed with the world, and the world government, I will go find you. Saying that, Zepha paused and said with a smile, however, I believe that day will not come. Karen didn't laugh. He couldn't laugh. After taking a deep look at Zepha, Karen turned around, looked at Uda playing beside him, and said softly, Uda, say goodbye to Grandpa, we are leaving. After saying that, Karen came to the deck alone, staring at the sea, not knowing what he was thinking. Bullet didn't leave, his eyes fixed on Smoker. Smoker tilted his head, and Bullet tilted his head too. No, buddy. Why are you staring at me? I heard you were very strong. That's okay. Maybe. Very well, I will challenge you to a duel. Smoker. Chapter 286. I want to take back everything that belongs to me. Advertisement. The junction of West Blue and the Grand Line. Windless Zone. If people from all over the world want to enter the Grand Line, they will basically choose to enter the Grand Line through Upside Down Mountain. Then choose one of the 7 magnetic routes in Upside Down Mountain, but no matter which island the magnetism starts from, once chosen, it cannot be changed. You can only walk along the channel one by one, and finally these 7 routes will converge to the Sabodi Islands. This method is the safest way to enter the Grand Line. But it's not the only way. There are always some daring people in this world, or people who are very confident in their own strength, who choose to enter from the Windless Zone. The Windless Zone is the strip area on both sides of the Grand Route where pirates are prevalent. They sandwich the entire Grand Route in the middle. There is neither wind nor current in this sea area, and the entire sea is absolutely calm. Most pirate ships are sailboats powered by the wind. Once the sailboat sails into this area, it will lose power and be trapped, unable to move. Therefore, this is a dangerous sea area that is almost impossible to navigate for pirates. Moreover, there are also a large number of supergiant Poseidons living here, which makes it even more dangerous and a very challenging area. Normally, pirate groups would not appear in the windless zone. But at this time, in a corner of the windless zone, an unusually large pirate ship floated slowly. The hull is so big that you can see it as far as the eye can see, almost comparable to a small island. The flag on the sail is a skull with onion hair and a pair of flaming bat wings. The front door is shaped like a huge mouth with exposed teeth. But from these, the identity of the owner of this huge ship can be seen at a glance. Moonlight Moria, a ruthless person who could arm wrestle with Kaido when he was young. At the bottom of the island ship, huge black figures are slowly moving with the thriller bark. The interior layout of the island ship is full of gloom and mystery, with dark red fabrics and the flickering candlelight in the dark corners visible everywhere. Whenever the night wind blows, the old-fashioned lanterns on the boat will sway and cast dancing shadows, making people shudder. Advertisement: the city walls surrounding the island ship are towering and ancient, and their surfaces are covered with thick moss and creeping plants, making them appear both solid and mysterious. In the center of the island stands an ancient castle, whose design was obviously influenced by the aristocratic architecture of the European Middle Ages. The towering spears, complex stone carvings and heavy wooden doors all reveal an ancient and mysterious temperament. Inside the castle, the lights are dim, and the walls are covered with all kinds of strange pirate flags and ancient weapons. The air was filled with damp and musty smells, and the entire cabin was filled with low voices and occasional laughter. The pirates sat around a large table filled with gold and silver treasures and rough food. Moonlight Moria sat on the main seat, her figure looking particularly gloomy in the dim light. His facial features are deep, his eyes are sharp and penetrating, and his shallot hairstyle stands out in the dim light. At this time, he was holding a newspaper and reading it slowly. 7 warlords of the sea, legalized plunder, Marine General Black Tiger Cullen? He frowned slightly, not expecting to receive such shocking news just after arriving at the Grand Line from West Blue. Hee. Do you want me to work for Marine? What a wishful thinking. Who do you think I am? Lousy is Moonlight Moria from the New World. However, there are some arguments for legalizing this robbery. Hee. It just meets my needs. Forget it, I'm going to be dormant for a while anyway, so I'll give Marine a face. Mariah's tall figure muttered to himself under the dim light, and his laughter from time to time made the empty castle a bit more eerie. Lord Moria, is there anything good you can do? At this time, a red apple suddenly floated into the air, and then slowly stayed beside Mariah. Then, with a click sound, a row of tooth marks appeared out of thin air on the red apple. Faced with such a strange scene, none of the pirates present expressed shock, as if they had long been used to it. Hee. Absalom, you can see for yourself. Moria laughed sinisterly and put the newspaper in the air. The newspaper floated strangely in the air for a while. In place of the newspaper, a long-haired man with gorgeous clothes and a terrifying face appeared out of thin air. His nose, mouth and jaw are leonine features, making him look both majestic and terrifying. He is one of the 3 weirdos of Moria, Paramisha, owner of the transparent fruit, Absalom. Advertisement. Absalom glanced sideways at the newspaper, with a sly smile on his lips. Hey, this is really an interesting development. It seems that our actions can be more unscrupulous. His voice was low and hoarse, and from time to time it was accompanied by the roars of wild beasts as he spoke. Moria stood up, his huge figure like a moving shadow. He walked towards a high window of the castle and looked at the calm sea in the windless zone, with a kind of eager light shining in his eyes. Hee. Since the world government is so generous, how can we not obey? Busalom, get ready. We want Marine to see what it is like to join the 7 warlords of the sea, Moonlight Moria. Existence. As you command, my lord. Abu Salim raised his hands very excitedly. Then, he scratched the back of his head and asked blankly. Ahem, Master Moria, what are you preparing for? Mariah paused slightly and glanced at Abu Salim helplessly. There are 3 weirdos under him, for Abu Salim, who is full of pornographic waste. Moria did not doubt his loyalty at all, but his ability to do things made Moria very uncomfortable. But he also understands that only when he encounters real trouble will Abu Salim become reliable and deal with it seriously. Moria turned around and patted the window sill gently. The air around him seemed to condense for a moment. He pondered for a moment, turned his gaze to the distance, and said slowly. We now need to accumulate more strength, strengthen our fleet, expand the zombie army, and make the Moria pirates great again. He cast his gaze out the window, and a hint of mist appeared and disappeared. Ahead is the Devil's Triangle, where there are countless shipwrecks and various corpses. Hee. Absalom, the rest is up to you. Send our scouts to explore deeper, find more corpses and resources for me, and bring them all under our control, among them. As you command, Lord Moria. Absalom showed a sinister smile, and then disappeared out of thin air, leaving only an apple spinning in the air. Following his order, the castle became lively again, and the pirates quickly began to prepare for the upcoming operation. Mariah closed his eyes, leaned against the window, and listened to the sound of the waves gently lapping the hull. He smiled slightly and murmured to himself. New world, wait for me to come again. Kaido, this time, I want to take back everything that belongs to me. Chapter 287 The Vengeful Manchili Advertisement, that's it? On the vast sea area of the Sabodi Islands, a small and exquisite warship is swaying slightly with the waves. Bullet stood on the bow of the ship with his arms crossed, looking down at Smoker who was lying on the ground and unable to move with cold eyes. At this moment, his eyes were full of disappointment. In order to verify whether the so-called Marine's brightest star in Karen's mouth was worthy of his name, Bullet launched the attack without any reservation, not even the slightest intention of testing, and directly used all his strength. What he never expected was that Smoker, who had high hopes, would be so vulnerable that he couldn't even survive one round. Is this Marine's brightest star? Bullet frowned and murmured to himself suspiciously. He couldn't help but begin to have deep doubts about the authenticity of what Karen said. As for whether these companions around him could be a powerful help to him, Bullet was once again filled with doubts and uneasiness. Compared to Bullet who was confused, Smoker seemed even more confused because he had already fallen asleep. Don't worry about it. Tetsuro, who was on the second floor deck of the warship, couldn't help but raise his hand to wipe away a layer of fine beads of sweat on his forehead. Before setting off, he had vaguely heard Karen's unstinting praise for Smoker. And, before setting off, he seemed to feel Bullet's eyes scanning towards him intentionally or unintentionally. When he thought of this, Tetsuro's face instantly became paler and ugly. He is not a masochist. It's okay. Compared to the panicked Tetsuro, Karen seemed calm and calm. You know, he is the most dazzling star in Marine. After Karen added, he continued to stare at his fishing rod. He felt that he was about to catch a fish. Tetsuo looked at Smoker who fell to the ground and listened to Karen's praise of Smoker, always feeling that it was ridicule. But he misunderstood Karen. Karen really wasn't sarcastic. In his opinion, the reason why Smoker is so arrogant is that he has had too few battles with strong men. In the recruiting training camp, it can be said that no one can beat him except Karen, which leads to his arrogant character. Naturally, he is also very relaxed about training. Especially after Karen left military school, Smoker has no opponent at all. Advertisement he can only immerse himself in his own world. After all, in his heart, Karen is special. There's nothing wrong with him being a little worse than Cullen. According to the development line of the plot, after he was assigned to Rog Town, he would continue to be immersed in it. It was not until he met Luffy and his gang that his strength was improved again. Now, Karen wants Bullet to play the role of Luffy. Smoker knows very well that Bullet is one of his own. But he also knew that Bullet's identity was a pirate, and he was a marine. Karen is also looking forward to whether Smoker will rebound after being humiliated like this by a pirate. Whoosh! The fishing line was tightened, and Karen's eyes lit up. He swung the fishing rod and pulled up a dilapidated wooden barrel. Then, he couldn't wait to split the barrel in half. Alas! There hasn't been any good stuff for several days. Karen sighed and threw aside the few pieces of clothing he took out of the barrel. Sit back to the original position again and put the fishing rod back into the sea. It's been half a year since I last caught the universal capsule and the stone fruit. During this period, all he caught were worthless things. Although there was nothing good, he retained this feeling of fishing. Before departure, Tetsuo looked at Karen, but couldn't help but ask his doubts. Did you say that I can become as powerful as him? Karen's movements paused slightly. He turned around and looked at Tetsuo. Certainly, but I have no other ability besides absorbing gold. Tetsuo was in doubt. Karen stared deeply into his eyes and chuckled. What, don't believe me? Believe. Karen comforted. Haha, Tetsuo, don't belittle yourself. The reason why you are not strong now is just because you still have too little gold. But, I've absorbed so much, it's not enough yet. Don't worry, we will pass there on this trip. By then, your strength will definitely be qualitatively improved. Do you believe that golden incense really exists? The legend of the Great Liar, Nolando's Golden Land is well known in the North Blue. As a North Blue native, Tetsuo has naturally heard of it. Of course, once we deal with Moria and Mihawk, we'll go. Karen chuckled. He already had a plan for Tetsuo. He had to go to the Golden Land, because there was also the Logia Devil Fruit, known as the strongest Logia Devil Fruit, the Thunder Fruit. Advertisement and Arc Proverbs. It was a unique ship that could sail to the moon. Okay. Tetsuo nodded and returned his gaze to the first floor. At this time, Bullet had already retracted his gaze, staring at the rough sea, wondering what he was thinking. Tetsuo's only impression of Bullet was that he was a scary guy who only wanted to fight. It was as if he was not interested in anything in this world except fighting. Therefore, Bullet's relationship with everyone on this ship is not very good, very few, or no interactions at all. So, he naturally leaves poor Smoker alone. His heart is already full of prejudice against the weak, even if this person is his companion. Tetsuo sighed, ready to jump off the railing and drag Smoker back to his bedroom. At this moment, a young female voice came from the deck on the first floor. Hey, big guy. Manchili stood beside Bullet and woke Bullet up. Bullet lowered his head and searched for a long time before he found the princess of the Dongtada clan. At this time, the princess was obviously angry. "You are so insulting, I am right at your feet." She pouted her little mouth angrily, her face full of dissatisfaction. "You talking to me, little one?" Bullet grinned, frightened to the point where Manchili finally mustered up the courage to shrink back. "You. Why are you smiling so scary?" Manchili pretended to be calm. "Is it scary?" Bullet scratched his head. He was a descendant of the devil. Wouldn't his scary smile fit his personality perfectly? "Forget it. You seem to be injured. Do you want me to help you treat it?" Of course, Bullet's injury has nothing to do with Smoker. His injury was caused by Karen's beating. "You know how to treat?" "Of course, I am a person with the healing fruit ability. I can heal any injury." Manchili put her hands on her hips, very proud. "Then why don't you treat him?" Bullet pointed to the sleeping Smoker. Manchili glared at Smoker and said angrily, "Tell him to tell me that he is a pet, and you are seriously injured. In fact, some games are right, you can't offend the wet nurse by offending anyone." Smoker. Chapter 288 Eating Competition Advertisement. In the restaurant, a series of imaginative and mesmerizing sounds continued to be heard. If you ignore the tone, because it was Bullet and Tezzolo who made this sound. At this time, both of them kept rubbing their bodies with confused expressions on their faces. Bullet, a strong man nearly 6 meters tall, actually showed a shy expression at this moment. He looked intoxicated and spoke plausibly. This is indeed the smell of grilled fish, and it is the best. The deep and mellow aroma seems to spread slowly in the air, like the sea breeze carrying the salty fragrance and the residual warmth of charcoal fire, penetrating every inch of your taste buds. As soon as he read a sentence, Tezzolo also continued not to be outdone. Yes, the skin of the grilled fish is slightly charred and extremely crispy, with a bit of caramel sweetness, while the fish itself is tender and juicy, as if every bite can release the deliciousness of the deep sea. Bullet continued. The intertwined taste, deliciousness and aroma blend, layer by layer, as if the entire taste has been conquered by it, making people immersed in it and lingering. The two of them squinted their eyes and started commenting one by one. Everyone, Monet, Sugar, Buffalo, Baby 5, looked at each other, all with black lines on their heads. I didn't expect that Bullet, with his thick eyebrows and big eyes, would act like a little girl after eating delicious food. Isn't it just a delicious meal? Is it used like this? Sister, what's wrong with him? Sugar covered her eyes with her hands and asked Monet curiously through the gap. Monet cleared his throat and said with a smile, "I heard that he has been in Impel prison for nearly 10 years. It may be the first time he has eaten such delicious food. He is a little excited?" "What about Tezzolo?" Sugar asked. Well, Monet didn't know how to answer, but looked at his food thoughtfully. Only Smoker seemed to have expected it. He quickly took out a phone bug from his arms and clicked it to start recording. He still hasn't forgotten how he was beaten by Bullet a few days ago. Now, given this rare opportunity, of course he wanted to record this precious scene. In fact, after Karen finished cooking, Karen told them to go to their rooms and eat alone. Smoker, who has eaten Karen's food, naturally knows why. Advertisement, but Bullet didn't know that, so in order to retaliate for Bullet's ruthless abuse of him, he did not hesitate to provoke Bullet. "Hey, Bullet, although the food is delicious, it's just that little. Why don't we just eat here? After eating, I will challenge you to a duel again." Bullet looked at Karen leaving and glanced sideways at Smoker. "You want to challenge me to a duel? Of course, you are bored too. But it's really pointless to fight you, you're too weak." Bullet grinned and said matter-of-factly. Damn it, Smoker's back molars were almost broken. During this period, he challenged Bullet many times without believing in evil, but he lost miserably every time. However, this time he was full of confidence. Do you think I will lose again?" As he spoke, his arm was suddenly wrapped in a dark substance. Armed and domineering, after being beaten so many times, his armed color was finally condensed. "Ha ha ha, are you armed?" Bullet nodded, then shook his head. "No, it's still boring." Ever since he knew that Smoker had not yet mastered hockey, he had lost the idea of fighting Smoker. For him, if he can't have a hearty battle, simply abusing food will be meaningless. With that said, Bullet took his food and was about to leave. Seeing that Bullet was not fooled, Smoker sighed imperceptibly. After thinking about it, he spoke again. "Ahem, Bullet, what's the point of just having a fist-to-fist fight?" Bullet remained unmoved and continued walking. Smoker gritted his teeth and stopped in front of Bullet. "I have a good idea. There happens to be a pile of food here. How about we compete with each other to finish it first?" Bullet still has no intention of stopping. Upon seeing this, Tezzolo quickly stepped forward to smooth things over in order to prevent the situation from getting too tense. "Ahem, let's do this, Smoker, I'll compete with you." Smoker didn't seem to hear it and still stared at Bullet. He made a very exaggerated gesture and shouted. No, the mighty, devil's descendant, wouldn't dare." After speaking, he deliberately sighed and said loudly. Advertisement. Also, if he loses to a small character who doesn't know conquerors, he will definitely feel very embarrassed. Bullet heard this, stopped, stared at Smoker, and showed a serious expression. Who do you think will lose? Smoker quickly covered his mouth. I didn't say you will definitely lose, but I think I will win. Ha ha ha, boy, you successfully attracted my attention. Bullet pushed the dining table, stopped in front of Smoker, and continued. In that case, let's get started. So, under the watchful eyes of everyone, a confused Tetsolo joined Bullet and Smoker in the food duel. Of course, Smoker didn't eat it first. This grilled fish is like a chance encounter in life. Every texture and aroma of it seems to remind me that the beauty hidden deep in the ordinary in life often needs you. What's wrong with me? What is the devil's descendant? Bullet suddenly woke up from his immersion in the middle of the sentence. He stared blankly at his hands on his chest and the debris on the ground, with a vague suspicion in his mind. MD, am I unclean? Boom! Conquerors suddenly activated, and a tyrannical force caused the warship to crack a spiderweb-shaped gap on the spot. Here, Smoker quickly put away his phone bug. The whole person almost collapsed on the ground. As soon as he raised his head, he found Bullet staring at him fiercely. My life is at an end, what did you do to me? Bullet looked at Smoker angrily, but soon he realized something was wrong with Tetsolo next to him. At this time, Tetsolo was completely unaffected by his conquerors, and was still immersed in his own food fantasies. Every bite seems to be in close contact with the ocean. The perfect combination of delicate fish meat and charcoal fire makes people feel the gift of the ocean and time. This grilled fish is not just food, it is more like a story. Looking at Tetsolo, who was also meticulous and posing, he already understood what was happening. His face was livid, and dense cold sweat broke out on his forehead unconsciously. Is this what I looked like just now? This gesture, this look, is simply more girly than girly. Chapter 289 Elegant Butterfly. Advertisement. The atmosphere fell into an eerie silence. Except for Tetsolo, everyone stared at him, while Smoker pretended to stare at him. It was Monet who was the first to break the silence. She stared at the food and said carefully, there's something wrong with this food. Buffalo swallowed his saliva. You mean, this food is poisonous? Monet rolled his eyes at Buffalo. How is it possible? How could Master Karen poison us? Didn't he just tell us to eat in our own room? I'm afraid there is such a reason. It was also the first time for her to eat food cooked by Karen. In fact, if she hadn't seen the food cooked by Karen with her own eyes, she would not have known that Karen had such good cooking skills. Didn't you see that Miss Uda and Princess Manchili, who have been with Master Karen for the longest time, both returned to their rooms with food? Monet said again. Buffalo nodded. I see. But Master Smoker has been following Master Karen for a long time, why didn't he? After saying that, he glanced at Smoker and then at Bullet, thinking of Smoker's actions just now. He didn't dare to say anything. At this time, Tetsolo also woke up from the sea of delicious food. He looked at everyone with a blank expression. Did I win? Tetsolo, who was confused about the situation, scratched his head. Why are you all staring at me? What the hell? What's going on with this ship? There's an enemy attack. He took a few steps back and looked at his surroundings vigilantly. The body was faintly glowing with golden light, ready for battle at any time. Who is so brave? Didn't you know this is Admiral Marine's ship? Tetsolo looked solemn, and the person who dared to attack must be a superpower. Could it be that Lord Cullen's identity has been discovered and the world government is preparing to cleanse us? As a slave, he never forgot his purpose for a moment. He also knew how dangerous the situation of his group was. To be honest, he hardly slept well these days in Marineland, for fear that his side's identity would be exposed and they would face an encirclement and suppression by the entire Marine. He knew that no matter how powerful Karen was, he had no chance of winning against the entire Marine. Ahem, there was no enemy attack. According to the rules, Bullet finished the meal first, so he won. Smoker pretended to be nonchalant and pushed his dining table to leave. What are you going to do? How could Bullet let Smoker leave so easily? Tetsolo couldn't figure out the situation, but after hearing Monet and Bafara's analysis, he already understood everything about it. Advertisement, you win, I'm going to eat, Smoker said confidently. Really? Bullet snorted. Conquerors gathered together again, staring at Smoker. Since you want to eat, why not eat here? I'm shy and not used to eating in front of so many people. Smoker felt a little guilty after being stared at. Damn it, where are my clothes? Tetsolo felt a chill for no reason, and then realized that his shirt was missing. Ask him. Bullet looked at Smoker with a grim smile. What's the meaning? After knowing that there was no enemy attack, Tetsolo also relaxed a lot. HMPH, what do you mean? Don't you know if you let this kid perform for a while? Bullet snorted coldly, walked up to Smoker, grabbed a piece of grilled fish, held the collar on Smoker's chest, and wanted to stuff the grilled fish into his mouth. Oh, what are you doing? The armed color instantly covered Smoker's arms, but how could Smoker, who had just acquired the armed color, be Bullet's opponent? Hey, what, can't you afford it? Let it go, eat you. Bullet was unmoved and directly stuffed the grilled fish into Smoker's mouth. Then, accompanied by a puff of smoke, the grilled fish fell directly to the ground. Ha ha ha, you're stupid, idiot, lousy as Logia, even if you use your weapon color to stop me, I can still activate my abilities. Smoker felt the benefits of Logia for the first time. Let me tell you, Lousy can eat this meal if he wants to. No one can force Lousy if he doesn't want to eat. Bullet also has some difficulties. Smoker is right. Armed colors can only be touched and cannot invalidate the devil fruit's ability. Just use seafloor stone. Buffalo, who witnessed this farce, muttered in a low voice. It's just that we are all devil fruit users. It seems that there is no sea tower stone on this ship. Bullet was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. He had fought Smoker so many times, and he knew Smoker's fighting style very well. So he set his sights on a certain part of Smoker's body. Smoker. Gia, who said we don't have sea tower stones? Isn't that right? Bullet pulled out his stick and held it firmly against Smoker, with a sinister smile on his face. FK. No, Bullet, no, you can't do it there. There was a helpless expression on Smoker's face, and there were tears twinkling in the corners of his eyes. Advertisement. He hated himself so much for why he had to carry a seafloor stone weapon with him. Bang! His shirt was torn, and he began to murmur unconsciously, while his hands kept wandering around his body. Ah. The skin of this grilled fish is slightly burnt, with a little caramel sweetness, and it is extremely crispy. The fish meat is tender and juicy. Every bite seems to be able to feel the fluctuations in the depths of the sea, deep and surging. Looking at Smoker, who looked spoiled, she finally understood why Karen's reputation in the newspaper was so bad. Shocking. Those gasps on the Karen warship. Karen's hobby. Those flying clothes and naked men. It seems to be all right, just the content. Monet's cheeks turned slightly red. Ahem, sugar, let's go to your room to eat. Monet pushed his dining table and turned to leave. This is the food cooked by Master Karen, how could she not eat it, although it is a bit hard to say. Sugar nodded and followed closely. Baby -5 hesitated for a while and then pushed the dining table away. Buffalo sighed and prepared to leave. Wait, you can't leave. Smoker got up from the ground weakly and stared at Buffalo with an unkind expression. Without his reminder, how could I have ended up like this? Ahem, what's wrong, Master Smoker? Buffalo had a bad premonition and thought of Smoker's tragic situation, and he murmured in his heart. You eat here. Smoker clenched his fists, looking at the loyal and honest Buffalo. He just wanted to beat him up. Me? Buffalo pointed to his nose and looked at Bullet and Tetzolo with pleading eyes. Bullet and Tetzolo looked at each other, walked over to Buffalo and picked him up. Oh, no, don't do this, Lord Bullet, I just reminded you. Buffalo was on the verge of tears. Gia, it doesn't matter, Buffalo, right? I won't say anything about women, they will be looked at if they are looked at, but you can't do it. Since we have all eaten, you should try it too. Because I had been caught in the rain, of course I had to tear up other people's umbrellas. Yazudi, Chapter 290 Work Distribution Advertisement. What's going on? Karen, who had just finished eating, stared at the mess on the floor. Damn it, it's only been a day, and my warship has suffered such heavy damage. Karen felt like the sky was falling, the ship was falling. Everyone looked at their noses at their mouths, and mouths at their hearts, but no one answered. Smoker, say it. Karen glanced sideways at Smoker. Smoker. Karen rolled her eyes and looked at Buffalo. Buffalo froze. Then, his hands kept wandering around his upper body and he stuttered. This fish, this meat, delicious. Karen was so angry that she laughed. Karen said she didn't like this acting skill. However, through Buffalo's hint, he also understood what happened. Didn't I tell you to go to your room to eat? Karen didn't perceive Bullet's conquerors just now, it wasn't because his perception was dull. But Karen's meals are equally effective for herself. Even if he is as powerful as him, as long as he eats his own food, he will be immersed in the comments about the food. He had no idea what was going on outside. It can be said that he was at his weakest after eating. But he couldn't help it. His group seemed to be full of talents, but there were only a few who knew how to cook. If they follow the general navigation configuration, their ship's doctor will undoubtedly be Manchili, who possesses the healing fruit. Uta is considered a musician, and Buffalo and Baby -5 can be considered reconnaissance and sniping. Bullet can also make a reluctant cameo as a shipwright. After all, he has the fusion fruit and can freely control the components on the ship. The most important navigator, Karen, was handed over to Monet. During these days in Malinfondo, Karen specially signed her up for the Navigator Masterclass. Although the study time is not long, it is enough, and she is still learning. Tetzolo is in charge of the finances, Smoker is the handyman, and naturally the position of chef can only be given to Karen. So that's why Karen cooks for them. This can't be done anymore. Although the food I cook is delicious, I can't ignore this fatal flaw. Besides, as the captain, why should I control their food? I'm just responsible for whether they eat it or not. Karen thought of Wang Lufei and decided to learn from him. Karen looked at Baby 5's room. She was wearing a maid outfit and she should be able to cook. Advertisement, and it seems like her weapon fruit can be turned into pots and pans. Karen nodded secretly. Ahem, okay, Bullet, please repair the warship. Bullet looked at Karen in disbelief and pointed to his nose. Me. The descendant of the devil. You want me to repair the warship. Do you want to listen to what you are talking about? I'll fix it and give you a fight, Karen said helplessly. Okay. Bullet nodded, and the spiderweb-like cracks seemed to come alive, slowly coming together, and finally disappeared completely. Karen smiled with satisfaction. Sure enough, a combatant who cannot repair ships is not a good combatant. Good. Karen was the first to applaud, and then everyone started to praise Bullet feebly. Speaking of which, one or another of them are all devil fruit users. In this sea, if devil fruit users don't have ships, it would be a very bad thing. Even Karen himself holds the title of being a user with the ability of the fruit of words. Feeling the praise from his companions, Bullet looked a little uncomfortable. He rarely receives praise other than in battle, whether as a soldier or a pirate. He has always positioned himself as a fighting maniac. So, he stared at Karen feverishly. Where's my reward? I'll reward you now. Why does it feel weird? I am a weapon fruit user, not a kitchen utensil fruit user. Baby -5 protested. I need you to use your abilities on kitchen utensils. Karen said calmly. Am I needed? I will do it right now, Lord Cullen. I can't cure you, little one. Ahem, it's a kitchen knife, a rectangular one. Karen looked at Baby -5 whose right hand turned into a long knife and couldn't help but correct her mistake. I can't. BABY5 was a little embarrassed. I need you to. Advertisement. Okay, I'll do it right now. It's oily. Okay. Boom, FK. Karen quickly protected Baby -5 behind him. The fire spread quickly, scattered oil droplets exploded in the air, and the kitchen suddenly became like a huge fireball. Without any hesitation, the ice crystals spread rapidly and the flames were frozen in the air, turning into static flaming ice cubes. The temperature in the kitchen dropped suddenly, and the air became bitingly cold. Although the flames were frozen, the air was filled with billowing black smoke. Seeing that the fire was under control, Karen pulled Baby -5 in front of him. What did you pour? Karen demanded. Oil? Baby -5 looked at Karen with innocent eyes. What oil? Gasoline. You? Karen felt a severe pain in her chest. You use gasoline for cooking. Isn't that right? Baby -5 blinked, not sure whether it was because of the smoke or a little aggrieved, and there were faint tears in his eyes. Seeing her like this, what else could Karen do? She could only calmly explain all the precautions to BABY5. A meal took Karen 3 hours. I don't know how many times I failed, but when Baby -5 finally served the fish soup, Karen felt that the whole world had become wonderful. Karen looked at the steaming bowl of fish soup with mixed feelings in her heart. No, didn't I teach braised fish? Why fish soup? His eyes moved from the floating foam in the soup to the messy kitchen around him, and finally settled on Baby 5's face. Her eyes still looked innocent. What you made? Is this really edible? Karen asked hesitantly. Baby -5 clearly noticed Karen's distrust. She lowered her head slightly and said softly. I have followed your instructions. Ahem, it's okay. This fish soup looks pretty good. Take him out, everyone is starving. Okay, Lord Cullen. Chapter 291 Dinner Advertisement. It's finally time to eat. I'm so hungry. Smoker slumped on the sofa with a look of despair. Just now, Bullet had another hearty battle with him in the name of training. The results can be imagined. Damn Bullet, I must surpass you and become the strongest. Become the strongest except Karen. Smoker stared at Bullet fiercely and poured the fish soup in front of him into his mouth. FK. He almost jumped up from the sofa. Seeing everyone looking at him in surprise, he quickly covered his mouth. Baby -5 looked at Smoker with expectant eyes. Is it delicious, Mr. Smoker? It's delicious, absolutely amazing. This fish soup is amazing. Smoker danced excitedly. Karen looked at Smoker's exaggerated behavior and was a little suspicious. He was watching Baby -5 do it. Although the steps are correct, but, is it really that delicious? Then why do you behave like this? Monet asked everyone's doubts. Ahem, it's just that the first bite is a bit salty. Smoker was afraid that everyone would not believe it, so he took another sip. It seems really good. Karen nodded secretly in his heart. Baby -5 had lived up to his efforts. Let me have a taste. Seeing Smoker drinking so happily, Tetsolo couldn't help but take a sip. Then, his veins were exposed and his whole body was straining. Amazing. Who said this soup is salty? This soup is so good. Karen stopped drinking soup. Hey, this acting is too poor. Is it really that delicious? Baby -5 flushed and asked excitedly. It tastes great. It tastes 100 times better than Karen's. Smoker and Tezolo nodded at the same time. Bullet looked at Smoker and Tezolo as if they were fools. After eating Karen's food, he thought that there was absolutely no food in the world that was more delicious than Karen's cooking. So, under the gaze of the two people, he drank a large bowl. Boom. Conquerors expand directly. The entire restaurant was crumbling. Feeling his stomach turning, Bullet spurted out the soup. Ha ha ha. So funny. Advertisement. Seeing that his plan was successful, Smoker clutched his stomach and did not hide his ridicule. Hey, Tetsolo also gave up his disguise and bent down to vomit crazily. Bullet's face was livid, and he forced the conquerors back inside his body. He was fooled again and made the same mistake. Bullet stared at Smoker, his aura becoming dangerous. Damn. Smoker. Ha ha ha. Bullet. Cocoa has nothing to do with me. I didn't want you to drink it. Everything is your own idea.
Smoker's face was filled with protest. You know, he drank 2 bowls.
As he said that, he pointed at Tetsolo, who was constantly vomiting. Besides, don't just talk about me, Tetsolo is also lying to you. He can't escape either. You two will train with me later. No, Tetsolo raised his head stiffly, but vomited again. As a last resort, he lowered his noble head again.
This. Baby 5 looked at Karen with tears in his eyes.
Karen coughed lightly, as if he had made some determination, reached out to pick up the bowl of fish soup, and took a careful sip. The taste on his tongue made him almost spit out. This is simply an extremely complex taste, with both the delicacy of seafood and some kind of subtle taste after burning. You can even feel the faint smell of gasoline. It's kind of special. Karen tried to force a smile onto her face. He regretted it so much. If he had known this situation, he would never have had the idea of letting Baby -5 learn to cook. Baby -5 tilted his head, a little confused. Karen couldn't help but feel soft. He took a deep breath, put down the spoon in his hand, and said slowly, Ahem, you have worked very hard, really. After a pause, he thought of the frozen flame block in the kitchen, and said again, I'll do it next time. I really want to know what kind of unique taste it is. Sugar pursed her lips, a trace of curiosity flashed in her eyes.
Meng Zili was also a little shaken, tapping her fingers lightly on the table.
Yeah, is it really that exaggerated? Seeing that they were actually interested, Karen helplessly spread her hands. In general, it is a taste that no one will easily forget after drinking it. However, you should not try it easily. Although the probability of being poisoned is very small, it is by no means impossible. What should I do with the rest of the soup? Baby -5 asked. It was hard for her to accept her failure for a while. Smoker rolled his eyes and laughed. Of course Bullet should be allowed to finish his drink. He is so big. He just took a sip and he must not be full. Advertisement Bullet was furious. I'd rather go back to Impel and go to jail. Buffalo whispered in an imperceptible voice. Is it really that bad to drink? Although his voice was low, Bullet still heard him. Okay, I almost forgot about you. Take a sip now. Buffalo wished he could slap himself unconscious so that he could answer his questions properly. Don't want. GGG, drink it, Master Karen, help me. Ahem, I had a bowl just now, it wasn't that bad, Karen said casually, looking at the ceiling. Bullet looked at Buffalo with a ferocious smile. Buffalo burst into tears. Weak and helpless. Seeing the laughter of all the crew members, Karen felt very good. Although the soup this time was not a pleasant experience, it was these small episodes that made the relationship between them closer. Even Bullet has adapted better here. This man who once struggled to open his heart because of the war has now integrated into the team. The team is not perfect, nor does it have a highly coordinated relationship from the beginning, but a strong bond is finally formed through constant collision and running in. Of course, in the end, Bullet did not force Buffalo to drink too much, just a small bowl. He took the remaining soup out and threw it into the sea without hesitation. Karen secretly remembered this sea area. The fish here are inedible and dirty. The mealtime ended quickly, and everyone returned to their work and training. On the deck of the second floor, he walked to the deck of the second floor, found a deck chair, lay down easily, and enjoyed this rare leisure time. There was a gentle breeze, and the sun shone on the sea through the clouds, making the waves sparkle. He didn't pick up a fishing rod this time, even though he was used to fishing on the boat. But today, he didn't want to touch that fishing rod anymore. Because he felt that nothing good would come out of this polluted seawater. While he was half asleep and half awake, he faintly heard a voice above him. Master Karen, Master Karen. Opening his eyes, Baby -5 and Buffalo looked at him nervously. From their faces, Karen could see worry and fear. What's wrong? Karen rubbed her head. An island appeared in the distance. No, it was a ship, moving towards us.
Chapter 292 Marriage. Advertisement. Thriller Bark.
Karen suddenly stood up from the recliner with excitement on his face. No, isn't this the Devil's Triangle yet? Met Mariah so soon? What Thriller Bark? Baby -5 looked at Karen suspiciously.
Karen asked. Isn't it a pirate flag with onion hair?
Not a pirate, but more terrifying than a pirate. Buffalo answered. The fear on his face was clearly visible. Not only him, but Baby -5 also had a very frightened expression. It's the evil army, the legendary kingdom of Germa 66. Baby -5 and Buffalo spoke at the same time. Karen was stunned. He didn't expect to hear different answers from the two people. Why did you meet the legendary evil army? Aren't they an evil organization that only exists in comic books? Both Buffalo and BABY5 are gripped by doubt and fear. Wanla, I'm going to be killed by a shark. Karen looked at Buffalo and Baby -5 speechlessly. As people who have lived in North Blue since childhood, the two of them have a natural fear of the image of Germa 66. Karen patted Buffalo on the shoulder, trying to calm him down. Ha ha ha, don't be so panicked, it's just Germa 66. Buffalo still looked around nervously, his eyes scanning the sky above the ship from time to time, as if looking for some invisible threat. Germa 66 are super soldiers with demonic abilities. The family behind them has powerful technology and superhuman combat power. There are even rumors that they can create weapons more terrifying than Marine. Buffalo's voice became lower and lower, as if he was afraid of being heard by some unknown force. It is said that they are a terrorist organization that only the legendary hero Sky can defeat. Karen rolled her eyes, feeling happy. He thought he had met his target this time, Moria. Unexpectedly, I just met Germa 66. Don't worry, it's just Germa 66, but I'm really curious as to why he appears here. It has been a full month since the last Marine Commendation meeting. Unexpectedly, they are still staying on the Grand Route, and it seems that their route is still facing them. Karen didn't believe they were here to cause trouble, unless Judge didn't live enough. It's not like he has never destroyed North Blue's evil organization. Thinking of this, he looked at Buffalo and BABY5, both of whom he also brought out from North Blue's evil organization. Advertisement. Speaking of which, half of the people on his ship were from North Blue, and he was really destined to be North Blue.
Come on, let me see what this old guy Judge wants to do. Kingdom of Germa. Judge stood at the port. There was only Reiju with a cold face beside him, and no one else.
The wait is finally here. Judge looked at the small warship in front of him. The warship was so small that it looked like a floating boat on the sea. You've waited long enough, Karen, he whispered to himself, with a rare expression of excitement on his face. He had waited long enough, and having witnessed the destruction of Don Quixote, he was determined to obtain the blood factor in Karen. Even if it costs his family affection, everything is for the glory of Germa. Reiju, are you ready? Judge looked down at Reiju. Her face was still so calm. As the first child of the Vinsmoke family, she was the first to be transformed. I don't know whether it was because the technology was immature, or because the Judge at that time still retained a little bit of humanity. Her emotions were preserved, but like other brothers, she could not disobey her father's orders. Coupled with the environment she lived in since she was a child, she slowly learned to disguise. Ready, father. Reiju's tone was calm, but the faint pain could be seen in her pupils. She didn't understand why she had to be given up even though she was already so good. But the programming in her mind prevented her from resisting. Listen up, Reiju, do everything you can to gain Karen's trust, and then obtain his blood factor. Only in this way can we restore the glory of our Germa kingdom. Judge seemed a little worried and warned again, as you command, Commander. Reiju made a Vinsmoke family military salute and lowered his head. There was no wave on his face, but there was a trace of struggle that could not be concealed in his eyes. Judge was stunned, noticing the change in Reiju's name for him, and a trace of panic flashed in his eyes. Then, burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, yes, that's how it should be. That's how it should be. His voice became lower and lower, until it was too low to be heard. Advertisement. See you again, Karen. Judge stepped firmly onto Karen's warship, and as soon as he finished speaking, his eyes looked over Karen's body. Although on the surface he was still the aloof leader of Germa, he was filled with unconcealable tension inside. The young Marine in front of him really had too much aura. Even Germa, who was quite popular in this sea, was eclipsed in front of him. In his heart, Karen is an out-and-out madman, although he is approachable on the surface. He knew how Don Quixote was destroyed. It was a family with a celestial dragon background, and it was so simply uprooted by Karen. And afterwards, Karen was able to be steadily promoted to general, although he knew that this was a conspiracy of the Tianlong people. But being able to target the Tianlong people only by launching a conspiracy is a proof of strength in itself. At the same time, he also noticed that behind Karen, there were two people, one large and one small, looking at him with a special look. There is both fear and curiosity, and even faint admiration and excitement. Judge nodded politely to the two of them. The two of them seemed to have seen something terrifying and quickly avoided his sight. Karen was a little helpless when he saw this, but he didn't say anything. After all, this was their education since childhood. Hello, Chief Judge. Karen said lightly that in terms of status, the king of the franchise country and General Marine are about the same. Maybe General Marine has more status than the king. After all, there are only 4 Marine generals and the king of the franchise country. It's really worthless. I've been waiting for you for a long time, Karen. Judge stretched out his hand and said with a smile, as if he knew Karen very well.
Karen didn't refuse and stretched out her hand to shake it briefly.
We were able to find Monet and sugar easily last time, and Judge helped a lot. What are you waiting for me to do? Karen asked confused.
In his opinion, Judge should be absorbing the remaining forces of Don Quixote in North Blue at this time. How can he have so much time to wait for himself?
Shouldn't you be doing the Don Quixote absorption industry in North Blue?
Karen asked her doubts directly. Haha, Judge laughed and said, there is no urgency about that matter. Let them fight for it first. Anyway, when I get back, what belongs to us will naturally be ours.
He said very confidently that Don Quixote, the most threatening force to him, had been destroyed, and other North Blue forces had no threat to him as long as they did not unite. Really? Karen nodded without asking too much. Karen, Judge stared at Karen's eyes and said seriously, we at Vinsmoke want to marry you. Chapter 293 Just Right Advertisement, ahem, what did you say? Karen could no longer keep the expression on his face, he looked surprised, and then the expression on his face gradually became dangerous. Conquerors appears faintly around the body. The ground under your feet has also become precarious because of this fluctuation, and there is a risk of collapse at any time. Marriage. The situation of the Vinsmoke family comes to mind. The first thing he thought of was Uda. Although he didn't think Uda was his daughter, in the eyes of the outside world, Uda was Karen's daughter. Now, when Uda is only 4 years old, someone actually has an idea for her. Just those few reformers, will he accompany them? This is like a will-o'-the-wisp boy riding a motorcycle parked in front of his warship, and shouting to himself when he gets up. Lao dang, is it safe to park my will-o'-the-wisp downstairs? This made Karen feel a kind of humiliation, a kind of contempt and humiliation that even the Golden Lion did not let him feel. Thinking of this, Karen could no longer control her conquerors. The hull beneath him began to shatter. The sky was dark, and in the distance, the snail ships of the Germa Kingdom's fleet began to fall apart under the influence of Karen's domineering force. Judge, who was standing next to Karen, was facing Karen's Wea. His whole body was trembling, and he was about to lose his ability to hold on. What are you going to do? Karen. Judge's voice trembled slightly, and he felt like a bug in front of Karen. There is always a risk of losing your life. What? Karen became increasingly angry, and Conqueror's madness raged across the sea, leaving a hole in the sky. Bullet in the distance stopped training and stared at Karen with burning eyes. His eyes were filled with the desire to fight. At this time, Karen was more powerful than he had ever seen before. This power. I will definitely surpass you. Karen stared at Judge and said word by word. Are you the only ones worthy of marrying me? Judge had a look of fear on his face. Finally, he couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed on the ground. He originally thought he was qualified to negotiate with Karen, but now, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness. It's fine without marriage. Let Reiju follow you and let her become your teacher. Advertisement Judge pointed at Reiju with a trembling finger. Reiju immediately stood in front of Judge, even she was full of fear. But she still had to obey orders. No, don't hurt my father. Reiju stammered loudly, his face full of stubbornness and anger. Judge sat on the ground and looked at the small figure in front of him, his heart filled with complicated emotions. Karen was stunned and stared at Reiju for a long time. The conquerors surrounding his body gradually dissipated. Then, I fell into deep thought. He seemed to have made a mistake. Judge's intention was not to attack Uda, but himself. What should I do now? How can I act like a villain? Ahem, Mr. Judge, do you mean to let Reiju get married? Karen coughed dryly and looked at Judge tentatively. His voice boomed in Judge's ears. Judge was shocked and nodded quickly. After receiving a positive answer, Karen touched her nose with an embarrassed look on her face. It was really a mistake, he said. How brave was Judge to dare to take the idea of Uda. It turned out to be an own mistake. I'm sorry, Mr. Judge, it's not aimed at you. I just thought of something that made me angry, and I couldn't control my emotions. Karen bent down and tried to help Judge up, but Reiju blocked him. Judge is a decent person after all. Although Karen's words are full of loopholes, he still chooses to believe them, even if they are just pretending. That's it doesn't matter. It's just that I've been suffering from low blood sugar recently, which made you laugh. Ha ha ha. Judge smiled awkwardly and stood up from the ground. His legs were still a little weak, and it took a lot of effort to stand up. Looking at him, it seemed as if he was sitting on the ground just because of low blood sugar. Karen secretly admired him in his heart. Look at him, he deserves to be a king, he deserves to be a decent man, he is an old actor. Haha, is that so? It just so happens that I still have some candies here. As he spoke, Karen took out the fruit candy from his pocket and handed it to Judge. Because of Uda, he basically always carries a few candies with him. The corner of Judge's mouth twitched slightly. He took the candy, peeled off the sugar coating, and put the candy into his mouth. When it comes to acting, since you've done it, you have to do the whole thing. Yes, this candy is delicious. Advertisement. The Judge gave a thumbs up to express his praise. Reiju blinked, looked at Karen, and then at Judge. Looking at this harmonious and friendly scene, he wondered if he had just hallucinated. Ahem, General Black Tiger, this is the little girl, Reiju, you have met her before. Judge pointed at Reiju and smiled. Yeah, I've seen a very cute child. Karen thought for a while, took out a few more candies, handed them to Reiju, and showed a kind smile. Reiju looked at Judge, who nodded. She took the candy in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking. Karen asked, what do you mean by marriage just now? Well, it's like this. Won't Mr. Cullen help us get rid of a scourge in North Blue? As the royal family of North Blue, we, Germa 66, will naturally not forget what Mr. Cullen did. Judge said it very righteously and sincerely, as if the whole of Germa owed Karen a huge favor. If Karen hadn't known about Germa's reputation, he would have really believed it. To express our gratitude, we, the Vinsmoke family of Germa 66, have decided to do our best to give Mr. Cullen 1 billion belly as a token of our gratitude. Having said this, his tone paused and he continued. But we also know what an honest person General Cullen is. Rumors, pure rumors. Karen complained in his heart. He used to think that money didn't matter as long as he had enough strength. But now he has a lot of people to feed, especially a certain gold-sucking monster who practices gold. He was really struggling. So, I thought of a good idea, which is to give the 1 billion Baileys to Mr. Cullen in the form of a dowry. I don't know if there is a dowry in the pirate world, but for the sake of the plot, I can only write it this way. Well, that's a good idea, don't try it next time. You must know that the current Reiju is only 7 to 8 at most. This is forcing Karen to commit a crime. Judge continued unmoved. Furthermore, General Karen happens to be about the same age as our little girl Reiju, and they are not married, so it's just right. Ahem. What are you talking about? How old is Reiju? Karen couldn't help but interrupt. Judge smiled slightly and took out Reiju's birth certificate from his pocket. This year is exactly 20. Birth, Chapter 294 Conditions. Advertisement. Karen looked at Reiju, who was holding the candy and didn't know what she was thinking. Chief Judge is joking. Karen stared into Judge's eyes and said seriously, he would not let such a ridiculous thing happen. Judge was stunned for a moment, seeing Karen's seriousness, and was afraid that Karen would explode again. Since General Karen won't accept it, why don't you follow my other proposal and let my little girl become your disciple? Judge said tentatively. Having faced Karen's domineering attitude, how could he still act like the leader of a country? Karen said solemnly. Judge, I'm too lazy to beat around the bush with you. I can't give you my blood factor. They are all 1,000-year-old foxes, so Karen naturally knows what Judge's purpose is. He didn't bother to break up with Judge. No, you misunderstood. Judge waved his hands repeatedly and said hurriedly. Last time I knew you clearly refused. I already gave up your blood factor. This time it is really just because of your love for North Blue. Help. I believe you. Karen rolled his eyes. If he really wanted to help North Blue, capturing you on the spot would be the greatest help to North Blue. Thinking of this, Karen's eyes became dangerous again. It doesn't seem impossible. Anyway, he is now in an awkward period with the world government, and they are still counting on themselves to go to New World to restrict the 4 emperors. If he really wanted to capture Germa 66 on the spot, he felt that the world government would just turn a blind eye. Maybe they will still be very happy. As a superpower composed of 20 kingdoms 800 years ago, world government naturally does not want to see a powerful country that can unify a certain sea area emerge among its affiliated countries. As for the Germa family that once ruled North Blue, why they lost the power to rule North Blue is something worth pondering. The Germa family is known as the war experts, and the evil family, and the world government needs them to continue waging war and causing chaos. Because if the wars around the world are really resolved and the world returns to peace, then these countries that have entered a state of peace will most likely be unwilling to accept world government, and may even break away from world government. It seems very contradictory. The world government needs Germa 66 to provoke war, but at the same time it does not want Germa to really become powerful. There is a degree in between, and the specific result depends on what the ruler of Germa wants to think. But looking at Judge, he seems to want to unify the world. Advertisement. This is definitely a situation that the world government wants to see. However, Karen would not think about helping the world government solve problems. Moreover, he did help him in North Blue. Judge. Although he just asked for directions, he helped him. And it's not easy for him to take action even if he has no grievances or grudges. Putting away this dangerous thought, Karen began to seriously consider whether to accept Judge's overtures. I don't like beating around the bush. Karen finally spoke with a calm tone, but I'm not a stupid person either. Judge, you can save those useless lies and just say what you want to do. Judge's smile instantly faded. He didn't know that he was already on the verge of life and death. Faced with such frankness, he was a little embarrassed, but he still tried his best to maintain his dignity. I know you won't believe it, but, after a pause, Judge continued, but this is really my true thought. You know that although our kingdom of Germa is a kingdom, in fact, we are actually just one. Mercenary, Reiju is still young, I don't want her to follow me around and take risks. Judge still didn't intend to tell the truth, he continued. Furthermore, I accepted a mission and prepared to go to the East China Sea. The kingdom of Kokia opposite is very strong, and I am not sure of victory. Actually, asking Reiju to become your disciple is actually more of a form of entrustment. He said it very sincerely, as if the Germa family had reached the end of their rope. I believe in your character. A person who can offend Don Quixote for someone he doesn't know is not a bad person no matter how you think about it. He had already asked why Karen had enmity with the Don Quixote family. Karen's eyes became sharper. He looked at Judge, but shook his head secretly. According to the development of the plot, he knew that Germa 66 went to the East China Sea at a certain period of time, and Sanji, the chef of the protagonist group, was at that time. Wait, chef? Karen's eyes lit up. Didn't he just lack a chef? And now Sanji is still a minor, just in time to study. Here, Judge is still talking. What I said is true, General Karen. Although our Germa family once dominated one side, it is now in dire straits. If I hadn't been carrying the burden of history, I wouldn't have. Okay, I can agree. Karen interrupted directly, too lazy to listen to him. A flash of joy flashed in Judge's eyes, and he almost gave up, but he didn't expect to succeed. Great, I'll let her become your teacher now. With that said, he was about to let Reiju kneel in front of Karen, but was stopped by Karen. Advertisement, however, Karen smiled slightly. I have an additional condition. Judge's face froze, and then he asked nervously, what conditions? For the glory of Germa, he will agree to any conditions. First, since Reiju worships me as her teacher, from now on she will have nothing to do with the Germa 66 kingdom. From now on, whatever you Germa 66 kingdom does will have nothing to do with me. Karen looked at Reiju, and when she heard her name, she looked at her father. The judge didn't hesitate at all, he nodded immediately. Okay, I agree. He promised very decisively and resolutely, as if he was afraid that Karen would regret it. In his heart, Reiju has never left Germa 66, but the program in her mind was set by him himself, and the order that cannot be disobeyed is always in her mind. As long as Karen's blood factor is deceived, he believes that Reiju will return to yourself. Reiju looked at Judge blankly, with tears glistening in his eyes, but they quickly disappeared. Everything is for the glory of Germa. Karen saw the two people's reactions in his eyes and continued. The original 1 billion belly was converted into the equivalent of 1 billion belly in gold. Although he will go to the Golden Land in his future plan, that will have to wait until a few months later. Now that someone wants to give him gold coins, he will naturally not refuse. Ah, okay, no problem. Judge hesitated for a while and nodded again. There is another condition. Karen looked at Reiju and said calmly, in order to prevent Reiju from feeling uncomfortable in my place, I need to choose one of your sons to be Reiju's playmate and worship me as his teacher. The judge was overjoyed. He didn't expect to get such a benefit again. He forgot all his worries almost instantly, and a trace of greed and excitement flashed in his eyes. That's no problem. I have 3 children. They're Ig, Niji and Yuji. Which one do you want to choose? Judge agreed almost immediately, but ignored his other child. Maybe in his heart, Sanji doesn't deserve it at all. Karen smiled coldly, looked down at Reiju, and then looked at Judge. I want your third son, Vinsmoke Sanji. Chapter 295 Vinsmoke Sanji. Advertisement. Judge left. Before leaving, in addition to leaving gold all over the ground and 2 children with confused faces, he also left behind a snail ship warship that belonged exclusively to the kingdom of Germa 66. Karen's original small warship was no longer usable due to the 2 conquerors' persecutions. Wow. That's a lot of gold. Baby -5 and Buffalo were very excited to witness the whole process. Go and call Tetsolo over to absorb the gold, then pack it up and let's go to the ship in front. Karen ordered with a smile and turned to look at the calm Reiju and the frightened Sanji. Reiju stood there, holding the candy tightly in his hands, with Karen's words echoing in his mind. She didn't know why Karen chose Sanji, the kid who even her father Judge didn't care about. She lowered her head and looked at the candy in her hand. The confusion in her heart made her almost unable to feel the sweetness of the candy. Germa's glory and the way her father treated her made her feel panicked. Whether she had been abandoned or entrusted with a heavy responsibility, 2 completely different thoughts kept intertwining in her mind. At this time, Sanji was standing aside, curiously looking at everything around him. He didn't understand why he was selected by Karen, nor why he became a bargaining chip in this deal. As the third son of Judge, he has always lived in the shadow of his brothers. No matter what he does, he cannot get the approval of his father. Thinking of what he has experienced these days, he has nothing to do with the entire Germa 66 kingdom and his father, feeling hopeless. Now that he has emerged from the dungeon, he feels indescribably complicated, hesitant and excited at the same time. Elder sister. He stood behind Reiju, closely following his most familiar relatives. Reiju turned her head to face Sanji, her face still showing disdain, which was her habit for many years. Karen shook his head and said nothing more. Karen, Tetsolo said hello to Karen first, and then looked at the gold in the ground with joy in his eyes. This gold is enough to cover my whole body. Well, hurry up and absorb it. We are going to change warships. Karen patted his shoulder. Tetsolo nodded, set his sights on the gold on the ground, and started fusion and absorption. I have long heard that the kingdom of Germa 66 is made up of snail ships. I didn't expect it to be true. Tetsolo stroked the snail's neck and marveled. Haha, last time Karen and I met the kingdom of Germa 66 in North Blue, I was not surprised at all. Smoker laughed and looked at Tetsolo with a country bumpkin look. Karen's mouth twitched slightly. You were also amazed at that time, okay. Boring, Bullet said coldly, then looked at the snail's neck and eagerly said, I wonder if this big snail can block my attack. Advertisement. No, please don't. Smoker quickly stopped him. Bullet, if it breaks, we may have to feed Poseidons. Snort. Bullet snorted coldly, turned around and walked to the training room. Seeing him walking away, Smoker complained in a low voice, what a violent maniac. Then, he turned to look at Karen and said unceremoniously, Hey, Karen, what's going on with these 2 kids? Karen glanced at him and smiled. Isn't it obvious? Is he still not determined to give up? Smoker frowned slightly. He also knew about Judge's plot against Karen. It's not okay to keep a ticking bomb all the time. How about? Smoker winked at Karen. Karen rolled her eyes. Don't be so cruel, they're still children. What? Smoker scratched his head, but if we don't control them, will our secrets be revealed? It turned out to be imprisonment. Karen coughed dryly. He thought it was. Smoker looked at the two children and curled his lips. He was not very comfortable with what he had experienced in the Germa 66 kingdom. Therefore, there was a bit of evil in the eyes looking at Reiju and Sanji. You are all reformers. I really don't know what that guy is thinking. You are his biological children. Smoker's face was complicated, and his slightly dissatisfied eyes became soft. Don't disrespect your father. Reiju glared at Smoker, while Sanji lowered his head slightly. Humph, it's my father, don't you know why you came here? Smoker looked at Reiju warily. He still remembered that the children of the Vinsmoke family would suddenly attack. Forget it, he was embarrassed in front of Karen last time. If he was attacked by a child in front of Tezulo this time, he would not be ashamed in the Karen team. Mixed down. Reiju was shocked. Tears flashed in her pupils, and then she stared at Smoker stubbornly. Her childhood education taught her that the honor of the family is more important than anything else, and her father's orders must be obeyed unconditionally. She would not allow anyone to belittle her father, even if she was left alone in this place by her father. Okay, Smoker. Karen said calmly. I will personally teach Sanji. As for Reiju's identity as a transformed person, I will handle it when we get to New World. Karen didn't care about the program in Reiju's mind. He had Vegapunk behind him. Advertisement everything about technology, as long as it is left to him, there will be nothing that cannot be solved. This is why Karen looks down on Judge technology. Speaking of which, Vegapunk told him last time that he would give him a gift when they met again, and he didn't know what it was. Karen was looking forward to it. It was a gift from the world's #1 scientist. You want to teach him how to fight yourself? Smoker pointed at Sanji, who lowered his head, his tone full of surprise. Then, he looked around Sanji, but he didn't see anything special about Sanji. Sanji felt uncomfortable being looked at by Smoker and clutched Reiju's clothes tightly. Karen rolled her eyes and corrected, it's not fighting, it's cooking. Upon hearing the cooking skills, Sanji raised his head sharply and looked at Karen in disbelief. What did you say? You want to teach me how to cook? His voice trembled slightly. Learning to cook was what he longed for most, especially when he thought of his father's indifference and the oppression of his brothers. The dream of cooking became the only freedom he could pursue. Smoker looked at Sanji in surprise, then thought of Baby5, who had recently learned cooking from Karen, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He really doesn't want to eat those meals anymore. Can he really do it? It seems like he can't even hook the stove. Smoker's tone was uncertain. Sanji stared at Karen closely and said loudly, I can find a stool to cushion. Please teach me how to cook. I will not let you down. Karen nodded, glanced sideways at Smoker, and vowed, don't worry, there will be no problem this time. This is the chef of the protagonist group, how could he cook devilish dishes? Thinking of this, Karen actually felt like crying. He was finally liberated. 3 days later. Oh my god, why, what is this? Karen pointed to the darkness in front of him and looked at Sanji with disbelief. Aren't you the chef of the protagonist group? Why would you do such a destructive thing? Grilled fish. How is it, Mr. Cullen? It's not bad. Sanji looked at his work with satisfaction. Karen was speechless for a moment. It turns out that no one is born with the ability to cook. It is a skill that needs to be learned and practiced. Chapter 296 Thriller Bark Advertisement. Damn it, failed again. Karen stared at the innocent-looking Sanji, wondering if he had made a mistake. Is this person really Sanji from the protagonist group? It couldn't be the judge guy just randomly found someone to replace him. This thought only lasted for a moment before Karen denied it. It's simple, Judge doesn't dare, for him Sanji is just a child who doesn't matter to him. Even in his mind, Sanji is still an ominous symbol. How about it, Mr. Cullen? He excitedly picked up a piece of blackened fish meat and handed it to Karen, completely unaware that it had lost its normal form and only had a charred shell left. Karen took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was about to burst out. He moved his eyes away from the fish and turned to look at Sanji's face. How did you do that? Sanji scratched his head, his eyes a little confused. I made it step by step according to the steps you taught me. His voice became softer and softer as he spoke. These days with Karen were the happiest days for him. Not only did he not have to be bullied, but the most important thing was that he had eaten Karen's food and was impressed by Karen's cooking skills. Impressed. Don't drive me away, I will definitely work harder. Sanji said in panic. Karen looked at the results of Sanji's efforts and shook his head helplessly. Forget it, there's no rush, let's do it step by step. You can study here by yourself, I'll go and relax. Glancing at Sanji, Karen stretched and slowly walked out of the kitchen. Huh? It's dark? Karen looked at the dark sky, looking thoughtful. He remembered that it was noon when he entered the kitchen, and then he taught Sanji to finish cooking a meal. No matter how he thought about it, it shouldn't be dark. Haha, we're finally here. It seems like this is the Devil's Triangle. He walked lightly to the side of the boat and looked at the boundless sea. There was only deathly silence on the sea. As the endless mist deepened deeper and deeper, the visibility became much lower accordingly. At this time, Monet walked out of the captain's cabin with a book in his arms, and immediately saw Karen, who was deep in thought. With this thick fog, it seems we've arrived. She opened the book and read slowly. According to records, the Devil's Triangle has been a nightmare for sailors since ancient times. The legendary ghost ship will appear from time to time in the thick fog, leading any adventurers who try to explore its secrets into the endless abyss. Karen turned around, nodded slightly, and his eyes fell on Monet's book. On the back of the book was written, "Knowledge of Navigation and Geography." Advertisement. Since telling Monet that she wanted to be a navigator on the ship, she has been learning about navigation whenever she has free time. It has to be Monet. Much more reliable than the other crew members on his ship. Not only is he capable, but he can also do a good job and be serious and responsible. He is a rare talent. Karen remembers her being a secretary from time to time in the show. But the so-called ghost ship is actually just a defeated pirate ship. Monet continued, and as soon as she finished speaking, the entire ship suddenly trembled for a moment. "Looks like I hit something," Karen said calmly. "The fog here is too thick, it may not be able to see clearly." Monet nodded. Since they boarded the snail ship given to him by Judge, they have realized the automatic driving function. Lord Cullen. Baby Five's arms transformed into the shape of hang gliders and landed steadily from the air. "We bumped into a dilapidated sailboat. Smoker, Tezzolo, and Bafaro have gone to investigate." Karen nodded, looked at Monet, and smiled. "Then let's go take a look too. The days at the sea are so boring, even a little disturbance is enough to make people excited." Karen led Monet and BABY5, followed by Smoker and Tezzolo, and approached the broken sailboat. The sailboat seemed to have been drifting at sea for many years. The hull was corroded by the seawater and had many cracks. The deck was covered with thick salt and moss. You can vaguely see the damaged sails fluttering in the breeze, making a creaking sound. Karen stood on the broken hull, and a rotten smell rushed straight into his brain. This was not a smell, but a feeling. He frowned slightly, regretting coming here. Looking sideways at Monet and BABY5, they appeared to be very adaptable, but their slightly trembling bodies revealed that their hearts were not as calm as they appeared. "It's so scary, Monet, there can't be ghosts here." Baby-5 looked around, looking cautious. Monet stiffened and pretended to be calm. "How is that possible? This is just a crashed pirate ship." "Is that really true?" Baby-5 swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Her expression was still very nervous, her voice trembled slightly. "Advertisement, but there are no corpses or bones on this ship." "It must have been picked up by a vulture," Monet pondered for a while, then continued. "Or they jumped off the boat before the accident happened." Karen listened thoughtfully to the discussion between the two. "No body? It seems that Mariah has arrived, and has already started his zombie army plan." "Nothing, I thought something interesting would happen." Smoker and Tezzolo walked out of the depths of the fog one after the other. "Karen? Are you here too?" Smoker shouted in surprise. Karen nodded. "It's a bit boring. I took a look. Since it's nothing, let's move on." After driving for a while, a huge looming island suddenly appeared in the depths of the fog. Karen stood on the deck of the second floor with a slight smile on her lips. Thriller bark. "Great, finally met the island." Smoker shouted excitedly. "Anyone who drifts on the sea for a few weeks will miss the stability of land. But looking at it, it doesn't look like an island, but a pirate ship." Tezzolo rubbed his chin and frowned slightly. "Pirate ship?" Smoker looked forward, feeling something was wrong. "It seems that flag is indeed a pirate flag." His tone became more excited. Since Bullet joined, he has also entered into high-intensity training with Bullet. His arm color and knowledge color have all awakened. At this time, he wants to see if his strength has increased. Only by facing different enemies can you better test your own strength. "Yes, Moria's pirate ship is ahead. Pack it up and let's go sightseeing together." Karen came down from the deck on the second floor and said with a smile. With the overall strength of their ship, he didn't care about Moria at all. It wasn't just Moria. Except for Hawkeye, which might be a bit tricky, several other Shichibukai would only end up being killed instantly when they met Karen. Chapter 297 Zombies Advertisement. "Let's go." Karen held Uda's soft little hand with a smile on her face, and looked at the unique and eerie thriller bark in the distance. As the home of Moria, the design of this ship is unique and full of creepy elements, making people feel like they are in a real horror world. For Karen, this trip was more than just an adventure, it was more like taking Uda into a horror-themed fantasy park. It's shameful to say that as Uda's nominal father, Karen has never brought her to such a novel and exciting place before. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt in his heart. "Be careful. Although our strength is not weak, Moria can be chosen to become a pirate of Shichibukai after all, and he still has some strength." Karen warned, grabbed Uda's little hand, and stepped onto the thriller bark first. Behind him, Smoker and Tezzolo couldn't wait. The two looked at each other and jumped off the boat together. Sugar on the side held Monet's hand tightly, and her body trembled violently involuntarily. Her face was as pale as paper, and her lips trembled slightly as she said, "I don't want to go. It looks so scary." Seeing this, Monet quickly comforted him softly. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Master Karen is here, nothing will happen." Although her own voice was slightly trembling due to nervousness, she still tried to make Sugar feel at ease. "Besides, when we all leave, you will be even more scared if you stay here by yourself." Sugar thought about the scene of being left alone in the fog, and her face turned pale. No, I don't want to stay, I'll go with you." As if she was afraid of being abandoned, she walked a few steps faster and followed Karen closely. "Where's Buffalo?" Monet looked at Baby -5 and asked. Baby -5 opened his mouth and was about to speak when Buffalo's voice came from behind. "I went to call Lord Bullet." Everyone turned and looked behind them. Bullet appeared behind them like a small tower, giving people a strong sense of security. Smoker clicked his tongue. "I didn't expect you, a guy like you, would be interested in this place. I thought you could only train."
Bullet glanced at him sideways and said calmly, "Since we are both 7 warlords of the sea, I also want to see Moria's strength." Smoker was stunned for a moment, and then he remembered that Bullet was still targeting the 7 warlords of the sea's identity.
Haha, that's right. Apart from fighting, you probably have nothing to attract your attention. Advertisement, however, I am also quite interested in this Moria. If we want to fight later, let me do it first. As he spoke, Smoker raised his arms to show off his muscles. Bullet didn't refuse. If the opponent couldn't beat Smoker, then he wouldn't be interested. Now that everyone is here, let's set off. Karen looked around. The environment of the Thriller bark was very intimidating. It was filled with an aura of terror. Even the trees on the ship were extremely twisted. There were also several strange bird calls from time to time in the depths of the forest. There are tombstones and dilapidated buildings everywhere, and a strong eerie atmosphere permeates every corner. As the team advanced slowly on the Thriller bark, the surrounding fog seemed to be alive and began to surge slowly. Tombstones protrude from the ground, with all kinds of weird names engraved on them, many of which are even big pirates who have been missing for many years. Aren't the names written on these tombstones all strong men who have long been famous in the sea? Tetsulo stared at the tombstone with a bit of solemnity in his tone. This should be the zombie army created by Moria using his shadow fruit ability. Karen glanced at the tombstone and said, "It seems that he is ready to receive us." As soon as he finished speaking, the ground suddenly began to shake violently, and zombie monsters emerged from the tombstones one after another. They have ferocious faces, exuding a rotten aura, but their eyes reveal a cold light that does not belong to living things. Ho 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 ho. The breath of the living. It's been a long time since I've eaten fresh human flesh. There are so many at once, which one should I eat first? That big guy looks good, just right. It's time for my bones to be replaced. The low roars of the zombies echoed around, and they took twisted steps one by one, surrounding everyone. Ho ho ho, there are kids and daughters too. I heard they taste even more delicious. Karen's eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. He lowered his head to look at Uda, and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He thought Uda would be scared, but he didn't expect that she just stared at these terrifying zombies with curious eyes, without feeling any fear at all. The zombies froze, and they felt a faint coldness around them, but it quickly disappeared. Aw sneeze. Didn't you say that zombies can't get cold? Why'd I feel an inexplicable chill? Advertisement, me too, maybe because I just came out of the tomb. They didn't think much, and still stared at everyone excitedly. They like to see the horrified expressions of outsiders, which gives them a great sense of accomplishment. But after staring for a long time, they suddenly discovered that only 2 or 3 of those people looked scared, while the others looked at them with expressions like they were looking at rare animals. Is this script wrong? Aren't we zombies? Why aren't they afraid? The zombies looked at each other. Their combat power was actually not high, otherwise they wouldn't be scary on the outside. At best, it is the strength of ordinary people. Ho 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 ho. We are zombies. Yes, we are zombies, aren't you scared? Karen looked at these clumsy and scary zombies in front of him, chuckled and shook his head.
Afraid. Sorry, you are not qualified yet. The zombies were stunned, as if they didn't expect that these people in front of them didn't play according to the routine at all.
They roared, trying to intimidate each other with their voices. However, Karen waved her finger lightly, and a sharp sword energy passed through the fingertips, instantly breaking through the fog and directly cutting the zombies in front of them in half.
The other party didn't even need to draw their swords.
The cut zombies did not bleed like ordinary creatures, but turned into thick black mist and dissipated.
The surrounding zombies were obviously panicked. They didn't expect this group of people to be so powerful.
Swordsman? With this strength, he wouldn't be a great swordsman, would he? Are you kidding me? This is not the new world. How can we just meet someone who is a great swordsman? But the day before yesterday. Having said this, their faces fell into deep fear, as if they had thought of something terrible, and they shuddered involuntarily. Chapter 298 The Increase in Song Fruit Advertisement. These zombies are too weak. Tesoro smacked his lips, waved his hands, and golden light instantly appeared in the air. He used his ability to generate several golden spears, threw them casually with his hand, and accurately penetrated the bodies of several zombies.
The zombies are in complete chaos. They thought that this group of intruders would be scared or even scared and run away, but they didn't expect that each of them seemed to be on an outing. They whispered in a low voice, with a bit more panic in their voices. What's going on? Why are these people not afraid of us at all?
Don't we look scary enough? Or don't we smell bad enough? I feel like we're doomed. While the zombies were still doubting themselves, Smoker was getting impatient.
He turned into a cloud of smoke and quickly shuttled among the zombies. With a wave of his hands, he directly knocked several zombies away.
He also complained. These guys are too weak, they're not even qualified to warm up.
Monet stood behind the team, waving her hands, and cold ice and snow poured out from her fingertips, instantly covering the surrounding zombies and freezing them into ice sculptures. She clapped her hands and said softly, "It seems that's all the guards here have."
Everyone is so awesome. Baby -5 saw that all of his companions were so brave, coupled with the strength of the zombies on the opposite side, the fear in his heart disappeared. Her body began to transform into various weapons, bombarding the zombies indiscriminately. Stop fighting, I was wrong, I will never come out to scare people again. Woo, I want to go home to find my mother. Seeing how ferocious the enemy was, this group of zombies scurried away one by one, crying like ghosts and howling like wolves. It's amazing. Faced with such a terrifying scene, Uda showed no fear at all. She just blinked curiously, her eyes full of excitement. Karen rubbed Uda's head, his mind moved, and he said softly, "Uda, do you want to try your abilities?" Uda was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. "Really? Can I try?" "Of course, but be careful not to let it hurt you." Karen patted her shoulder and stepped aside. Everyone was stunned, obviously not expecting Karen to let Uda deal with such a disgusting-looking monster. Advertisement, but there was no trace of worry on Karen's expression, instead there was some expectation. The same boss in the theater version, although Uda is still young, she has already obtained the song fruit. Although Karen is confident that future tragedies will not happen, since he has chosen this path, he does not mind letting Uda know how to fight. "Then I'm on." Uda clapped his hands excitedly and stood at the front of the team. "Damn it. You actually let a kid come out to deal with us. It's so disrespectful, I will make you pay for your arrogance." Seeing that the group of people on the opposite side looked down upon their own group of people, this group of zombies, they couldn't help but let out an angry roar and slashed at Uda with their huge butcher knives. Just when the blade was about to hit Uda, a dazzling red light burst out from her body. The music starts. Uda smiled and opened his hands, and an invisible melody seemed to resound in the air around him. The zombie monster's movements suddenly stopped, and its body began to sway with her singing. What's going on? Buffalo's eyes widened. Uda's singing has a control effect. Tetsolo was also stunned. I've long heard that Uda defeated the Golden Lion's conspiracy with her singing. I didn't expect it to be true. Smoker secretly smacked his tongue. Uda hummed a minor tune, as if conducting a concert. The originally ferocious expression of the zombie monster became dull, and then it actually put down the butcher knife in its hand and began to dance clumsily. Ha ha ha, it's dancing. Baby -5 couldn't help laughing. Uda's ability is really not simple. Karen felt a powerful force rising in his body, and he knew that his ability had played a role. The growth rate of the song Fruit is even more powerful than the speaker given to him by Vegapunk. The zombies watched in horror as their bodies twisted in Uda's singing. They were not at all stiff in their usual pace, but full of flexibility. Some zombies even turned in beautiful circles. Monster. She is the monster. A smaller zombie squatted on the ground holding its head and shouted in horror. Who can tell me what is going on? Why are we dancing? The other zombie stared at his shaking legs, almost crying. Uda stood in the center of the field, eyes closed, and her voice was clear and beautiful. As the melody changes, the zombies' movements become more comical. Some zombies even do somersaults, causing their companions next to them to scream. This is so powerful, Monet said softly, with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Not only can it control the enemy, but it can also completely make them lose their ability to resist. Advertisement, what a convenient ability. Smoker sighed with emotion. It's so interesting. Sutang loosened his grip on Monet's hand, and the fear in his heart was overcome a lot. Bullet crossed his arms over his chest and snorted coldly. Boring. What do you know? Smoker glared at Bullet. Can you do it at such a young age? Bullet showed his pale teeth and said nothing. Smoker opened his mouth and thought of Bullet's childhood, feeling a little regretful why he mentioned this. Okay, Uda, let them go. Karen spoke up to interrupt the farce. Uda nodded and took back the ability of the song Fruit. How about it, Karen, am I good? Karen rubbed Uda's head and laughed softly. Of course it's awesome, Uda is the best. After saying that, he walked towards the group of zombies and said calmly, Now, take me to find Moria. The zombies looked at each other and saw fear and hesitation in each other's eyes. Huh? Don't you want to? Karen frowned slightly, with an aura that could not be disobeyed. Wish. We will take you to Lord Moria right now. The zombies were shocked, nodded one after another, and began to lead the way.
Just when everyone was about to move forward, a strange laughter came from the thick fog. Where are you going? The sound exploded out of thin air, and the strange thing was that there was no one around them.
As he spoke, there was the roar of wild beasts. What is going on? Baby 5, who had been acting as a scout, paused in his steps and kept his eyes wandering in the air. Who's there, Kiki? Don't be nervous, I have no intention of showing up in person.
The voice sounded again, this time even colder. However, since you are so eager to see Lord Moria, I will give you some gifts first.
Chapter 299 Black Knife Advertisement. Ouch, it hurts. Absalom held his belly in pain, traces of blood spreading from the corners of his mouth. There were bright golden shackles on his wrists, locking him to the ground. How is it possible? I am a transparent person who ate a transparent fruit. How did you see me? Absalom looked shocked. I didn't see you. Tetsolo smiled.
Then how did you? Perception, idiot. We can't really see his figure, but we can sense his location.
Perception? Absalom's eyes widened. I'm too lazy to explain to you. Tetsolo stretched and looked at Karen. How to deal with this person? Don't worry about him, he's just a small character. Karen said calmly. Damn it, I'm not a small character. Seeing that he was so slighted, Absalom shouted dissatisfied. Lousy is one of the 3 weirdos in Moria. Oh, since it's so important, let's kill him. Karen stopped. Ahem, actually I am nothing. Absalom resolutely surrendered, he had not lived enough. Are you kidding me? Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, Conquerors was activated instantly, and Absalom fainted instantly. What a powerful Conquerors. In the castle, Moria sat on the front seat with a solemn expression. Looks like he's already here. Opposite him, a man wearing a black trench coat and a black top hat stopped shaking the red wine glass. The time is about as I predicted. He stood up slowly, with the black sword behind him. As the man in the black top hat stood up, the atmosphere in the castle instantly became depressing and chilling. Advertisement. His pupils were very sharp, and just by looking at them, he felt like he was facing the sharpest knife in the world. Don't be so anxious, Mahawk. Moria still maintained his original posture, staring at the newspaper in his hand with a calm expression. He is just here to cooperate with us, let alone a mere general. Moria said disdainfully. His figure at this time was not as out of shape as in the plot, and he was still very strong. Just a general. Mahawk tilted his head slightly, his eyes as sharp as a knife, as if he could penetrate the confidence in Mariah's heart. You underestimate him. HMPH, you are too cowardly. Lousy is a man who has survived a fight with Kaido. A newly promoted general, is he more terrifying than Kaido? Moria snorted coldly, put down the newspaper in his hand, and stood up. His huge body casts a huge shadow, which combined with the dim lights in the castle makes it look even more eerie and terrifying. The Black Tiger general who defeated the Golden Lion. He grinned with a ferocious smile. If I can take away his shadow, then even Kaido, I will be sure to defeat him. You want his shadow? Mahawk shook his head, disdaining to argue with Moria, and turned to the window, looking down at the thick fog outside the castle. In the distance, the figures of Karen and his party were already vaguely visible, approaching the castle. Karen, let me see who is the world's greatest swordsman. Karen and Bullet looked up sharply, their eyes fixed on a window in the castle. Interesting. The corner of Bullet's mouth curled up into a sneer. That powerful feeling made his heart palpitate, and it also ignited the competitive spirit in his heart. You just said you met a great swordsman a few days ago? Karen asked the zombies leading the way. Ah, yes. We were sleeping at the time, and suddenly we sensed someone breaking in, so we did what we usually do, to scare him. The leader of the zombies trembled and said, I didn't expect. That man chopped down hundreds of guarding zombies with just one sword. Hundreds? Advertisement Smoker blew the smoke ring with a mocking look on his face. It seems like this place only has so much stuff. The zombie quickly waved his hand and explained. No, those are not ordinary zombies. They're Lord Moria's specially strengthened subordinates. But in front of him, they're just like waste paper. This is why our thriller bark guards have become weak. Because those powerful ones are dead. Karen looked thoughtfully in the direction of the castle, with a sharp look in his eyes. The development of things was somewhat beyond his expectation. Who is that swordsman? He continued to ask. The zombies looked at each other and finally replied in a low voice. He said his name was Mahawk. The air suddenly became solemn, Smoker frowned slightly, and Tezolo's eyes became a bit colder. Mahawk, Eagle Eye, Mahawk. Tezolo chuckled. The world's greatest swordsman seems to be one of our goals. Karen said calmly. Just right, it saves me having to look for him again. HMPH, that's interesting. Bullet clenched his fist. I can sense that guy is very powerful. It seems that the so-called 7 warlords of the sea really have something to say. In this case, leave that Moria to me, and I will do my best. Inside the castle, Mahawk stood by the window, watching the approach of Karen and his party. His figure was shrouded in shadow, and the black knife, in his hand stood quietly beside him, exuding a deep chill. Here we come, he said softly, without any emotion in his tone. Are you going to take action? Mariah cast his gaze at Mahawk casually, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and continued with a hint of imperceptible contempt.
It's up to you, it doesn't matter to me anyway, but the shadow on that guy's body is my trophy.
Mahawk turned around slowly, his sharp eyes like an eagle staring straight at Moria, with a chilling chill in his eyes.
He responded coldly. Humph, I have no interest in your so-called tricks. The conqueror's domineering and superb swordsmanship he displayed are worthy of me drawing my sword in a fight.
Hearing Mahawk's words, Mariah couldn't help but trembled, and a trace of fear arose in his heart. But just a moment later, he quickly adjusted his mentality and regained his confidence. Haha, really? That's great, but don't underestimate me too much. This is my territory after all. Anyone who dares to despise me here will only be greeted by endless despair.
Mahawk didn't answer, just stood there quietly, his fingers lightly touching the handle of the knife.
I hope you are worthy of the edge of this knife.
Chapter 300 Princess Perona. Advertisement. This is it, this is Lord Moria's castle.
The leader of the zombies pointed at the huge castle gate in front of him and stammered to Karen.
We are the outermost zombie soldiers and are not qualified to approach the castle, so we can only bring you here. Karen nodded, and the zombies immediately turned into birds and beasts and ran around to escape. Let's go. After stepping into the gate of the castle, the hall behind the door was dark and deep, with shabby flags hung on the walls, swaying slightly in the wind, and a strong smell of decay filled the air.
Who are you? As soon as everyone entered the castle, a pink figure wearing a gothic dress and a high hat suddenly fell from the air, holding a burgundy umbrella in her hand.
Princess Mononoke, Perona. After she finished speaking, without waiting for anyone to reply, she looked at everyone and said excitedly. Are you the new playmates that Lord Moria helped me recruit? Smoker blew out a smoke ring and said disdainfully, is this guy also a subordinate of Mariah?
Tetsolo chuckled. How does this style fit Moria's bad taste? Shut up. You actually call Lord Moria by his first name? Hearing that the two people were so contemptuous of Moria, Perona immediately yelled at everyone. She had been adopted by Moria since she was a child. Although Moria looked gloomy, he doted on her very much. She had long regarded Moria as her own family. Why not? Smoker still has that frivolous look, and he looks like a villain bullying a little girl. You, little girl, are actually defending Moria like this, so please invite Moria out. This way, we will save ourselves from having to fight with a child. Perona's face darkened and she said angrily, HMPH, you rude guys, how dare you ignore me, Princess Mononoke. Then let you have a taste of my ghost negative energy. After saying that, she waved the burgundy umbrella in her hand slightly, and several translucent ghosts emerged from behind her, flying towards the crowd with claws and teeth. What? Smoker frowned and turned his palms into smoke, trying to blow away the ghosts, but found that these ghosts had no entity at all, and the smoke penetrated them and had no effect. Advertisement. Are these ghosts useless? Baby -5 asked curiously, but as soon as she finished speaking, a ghost suddenly passed through her body. The next second, Baby -5 knelt down and sat on the ground, holding his head and crying loudly. I'm so useless. Why do we live in this world? I have no value at all. Smoker was stunned and looked at Perona. Perona showed a proud smile. He, my negative ghost, is best at dealing with self-righteous people like you. Tetsolo frowned slightly, raised his hand and summoned several golden rays of light, hoping to kill Perona with one blow. However, those golden spears penetrated directly through Perona's body and were unable to hurt her at all. She is a Paramecia ghost fruit user, Karen said calmly. She can freely control ghosts with different effects. Her body has also become a spirit body, and physical attacks are invalid. Big brother, do you know me? Perona looked at Karen curiously. The clothes you are wearing must be a marine uniform, the kind of poor guy who often arrests us but never catches us. Poor guy. Smoker snorted, with disdain on his face. You don't really think that eating a devil fruit makes you invincible, do you? He rushed forward with a lunge, and punched Perona with terrifying power, but Perona had already flown into the air and avoided his attack. It's useless. You can't touch me at all. Perona waved her umbrella with a proud look on her face. Humph. I can't touch you. Smoker smiled, and his upper body began to turn into a thick white mist. I don't think you are the only one who can fly. Lousy is the smoke man who ate the smoke fruit. In terms of the fruit's ability, I am much stronger than you. He roared, and his whole body flew into the sky along with the smoke. At the same time, the sea tower stone weapons in his hands were raised high in the air. White snake. Perona looked at the smoke with disdain. In her heart, no one could cause harm to her except Moria. But this time it was different. As soon as Halushi touched her body, she felt her whole body go limp, and the ghost fruit's ability was directly disabled. The whole person fell heavily to the ground. Advertisement. What's going on? Perona looked at the demonic smoker in horror, trembling. Humph, he is indeed a minor character. He doesn't even know Halushi? Smoker sneered and put his hands on Perona's throat. The power of the sea tower stone. Karen glanced at Perona and said, it can not only deprive the enemy of their abilities, but also make the person with the ability powerless. You are too confident, Perona. Don't underestimate me. I am Lord Moria's right-hand man, Perona shouted with strength. Smoker ignored Perona and looked at Karen. What should I do with this guy? He looks like just a little girl. Before Karen could answer, footsteps suddenly appeared in the empty castle, and at the same time, an angry voice came from upstairs. Damn Marine, what are you going to do to my lovely men? Everyone looked up at the source of the sound and saw a huge man slowly walking down the stairs. His face was as gloomy as a vampire, with a black cloak behind him, his hands on his waist, and a strange smile on his face. He is Mariah, Smoker whispered, with a hint of excitement in his tone. Hee. Moria let out his trademark wild laughter. I thought who was so bold as to dare to break into my territory, but it turned out to be Marine's little bugs. Are you Moria, one of the 7 warlords of the sea chosen like me? Bullet walked out of the crowd. As the tallest Bullet among Karen's group, he stood in front of Moria and lowered his head. Moria ignored Bullet, but glanced at Perona on the ground. Her face darkened. How dare you hurt my lovely Perona? Perona looked up at Moria, with a hint of guilt in her voice. Lord Moria, I'm sorry, I was too careless. Don't worry, Perona. Moria said coldly, no one of these guys can leave alive today. He stretched out his hand, and with a burst of cold laughter, the surrounding shadows began to twist and deform, as if countless hands stretched out from the darkness, surrounding the entire hall. Shadow Mage. Shadow Control. The black shadows surged towards everyone like a tide, trying to devour them. Huh, what a small trick. Bullet snorted coldly, and the entire dilapidated castle was crumbling. Just leave it to me, just in time, let me warm up. With that said, without waiting for anyone to react, he rushed towards Moria. Chapter 301 Sword Showdown Advertisement. Damn Bullet, didn't you tell me to make the first move? Smoker glared at Bullet, but did not rush towards him. I'm afraid he has itchy hands for a long time. Tetsulo chuckled and said, he endured it all the way and finally met a decent opponent. With that guy's character, it is normal for him to charge forward. HMPH, damn guy. Smoker curled his lips. But, fortunately, isn't there another guy? Tetsulo set his sights on Mahawk in the darkness. He just stood there quietly, but the aura of his body made it impossible for anyone to ignore it. First meeting, Karen. Mahawk slowly walked down the stairs, completely unaffected by the battle between Moria and Bullet. Karen chuckled. To be honest, I was surprised. I didn't expect you to show up here. It's nothing. After I knew that I was chosen to become the 7 warlords of the sea, I was looking forward to meeting you. Mahawk's calm face showed a rare look of excitement. Come on, let me learn your sword skills. A strange look came from the corner of Karen's mouth. Are you sure? Of course. I have read your newspaper. Mahawk's eyes were piercing, with a sharp fighting spirit in his falcon-like eyes. You are known as Marine's swordsmanship genius and have defeated countless strong men. Let me see it, is it as rumored? Then do you know that I have a trick to make the one-sword immortal kneel down? Of course, I came just for that sword. Mahawk slowly drew out the Yi, which was a black sword that shone with a cold light and was known as the strongest black sword in the world. Is this the legendary 12 skills of the supreme sharp sword? Karen's palm stayed in the air, and the bird flew down from Karen's shoulder, transforming into a long black sword. Zhangfeng, this famous sword that was originally just a good and quick sword, now exudes an aura that is comparable to Mahawk's Yi. A trace of disappointment flashed in Mahawk's eyes. A famous sword that ate a devil fruit? Is such a weapon really worthy of the purity of a swordsman? Advertisement. Zhangfeng seemed to realize something. After hearing Mahawk's words, the originally dark blade began to tremble slightly, making a low humming sound. Karen was stunned. He felt a strong fighting spirit and a request from Zhangfeng. He stretched out his hand and stroked Zhangfeng's blade and chuckled. Although Zhangfeng has swallowed the devil fruit, its strength does not rely on external force, but on the spirituality tempered by countless battles. This sword has been with me for many years. It is no longer a simple weapon, but my most loyal partner. When Mahawk heard this, the sharpness in his eyes softened slightly, and he nodded slightly. It seems that this knife does have something special about it. Then, let me see how far your tacit understanding with it can reach. The two people faced off, and the atmosphere instantly became tense. It was as if there were countless sword shadows surging in the air between the two people, and the silent battle between the swordsmen made the air heavy. Karen turned slightly sideways, holding Zhangfeng's wrist relaxedly but without losing strength. He whispered, "Don't worry, old man." As soon as he finished speaking, Mahawk's black knife, Yi, flashed a cold light, and he took the lead to take action. A straight sword energy tore through the air and headed straight for Karen. The sharpness of the sword energy caused a deep crack to appear on the surrounding ground. Karen snorted coldly, raised his hand and waved. The hidden edge drew an arc and collided head-on with the sword energy. He did not use the 100% empty-handed sword, which was Zhangfeng's request. The sound of gold and iron clashing echoed in the hall, and the two sword energies collided, bursting out with roars. It's really good. Mahawk sighed in admiration, gave up the test of swordsmanship, stepped lightly, and approached quickly like an eagle. He wanted to experience Karen's swordsmanship up close. The Yi in his hand was swung repeatedly, and every blow was precise and fatal. Karen was unhurried, his body was as nimble as the wind, and he competed with Mahawk at high speed in a narrow space. The sound of swords clashing continued one after another, and along with the sharp sword energy, the entire castle hall was covered with slash marks and gravel. Is this the strength of the world's strongest swordsman? Smoker looked at the battle in front of him and blew out a smoke ring with a complicated expression. The two of them are simply monsters. Advertisement Tetsulo leaned against the wall, crossed his arms across his chest, and said with a smile, "This guy is much more powerful than that." During the battle, Mahawk's expression became more solemn. Every sword he struck carried a fatal threat, but he was still unable to break through Karen's defense. Neither of them used so-called sword moves, or every move they used was a sword move. At this moment, the sword fight between Karen and Mahawk has gone beyond mere skills, but a spiritual collision. Each sword seems to be casual, but it contains hidden murderous intent and seeks the opponent's flaw. After another collision, the two stood opposite each other. Your swordsmanship? Mahawk frowned slightly, noticing the weirdness of Karen's swordsmanship. Within the scope of his understanding, people controlled swords, but Karen was just the opposite. Haha, he deserves to be the world's best swordsman, Karen exclaimed. He actually had no talent for swordsmanship, and he only relied on strength to win every battle. But since Zhang Feng ate the devil fruit of Jiuhuo Nio, it gradually awakened awareness of self. If we follow the settings in the previous life novel, that is to say, Zhang Feng possesses the sword spirit. It is a sword in itself, and the understanding of swordsmanship is naturally self-taught. All my swordsmanship comes from Zhang Feng, Karen admitted it directly. How is this possible? A sword is a sword. How can swordsmanship come from the sword itself? Hearing Karen's answer, Mahawk showed a look of disbelief in his eyes. He held the black knife, tightly in his hand and carefully looked at the hidden edge in Karen's hand again. Swordsmanship comes from the sword itself. Mahawk repeated in a low voice, as if confirming whether this was possible. He had never heard of such a saying. A swordsman completely entrusted his power to the weapon, and the weapon could still dominate the battle. I've never heard of that. Karen stared at Zhang Feng. He was actually a little confused as to whether Zhang Feng's awareness came from Guhuo Bird or Zhang Feng himself. Only animals can be made into weapons. Does this mean that devil fruit itself has its own consciousness? Or is it only the animal system? Chapter 302 Fooling Hawkeye. Advertisement, interesting saying, interesting swordsmanship. There was more exploration and excitement in Mahawk's eyes. If people and swords really have the same mind, does that mean that the ultimate in swordsmanship lies not in technique, but in the resonance of heart and mind? Mahawk said slowly, his eyes falling on the hidden front in Karen's hand, his expression more serious than ever. Karen nodded and said calmly, I'm not exaggerating. Zhang Feng is no longer an ordinary sword to me. It has been fighting alongside me for many years. Its will is part of my battle. Maybe this is some form of sword. Let's resonate. When Mahawk heard this, his hand that held trembled slightly. He looked down at the black knife in his hand, and there was a trace of hesitation in his usually calm and self-possessed eyes. Mahawk's eyes were deep, and his fingers gently brushed the blade of the black knife. As if he was feeling whether this weapon that had been with him for many years also had a will that he had never really touched. Resonance. Resonance between man and sword. He repeated in a low voice, as if mumbling to himself or asking himself a question. If the sword also has a will, then my knight has been silently guiding me, but I have never noticed it. Karen looked at the world's #1 swordsman in front of him, but secretly smiled in his heart. In fact, the so-called resonance of the mind and so on all come from the novels he read in his previous life. The integration of man and sword spirit and the like are themselves just a way of talking about the swordsmanship in the previous life. Yang Huasha's understanding of kendo is so broad and profound, it is not limited to the level of techniques, but also pays more attention to the spiritual connotation and philosophical thinking of kendo. Even just mentioning one or two theories is enough for the world's greatest swordsman to think deeply. Do you know what the ultimate level of swordsmanship is? Karen said seriously. Mahawk, who was still immersed in the resonance between heart and mind, was stunned for a moment, and there was a trace of confusion in his calm eyes. What advertisement he regretted as soon as he asked. The most taboo thing in a kendo competition is being disturbed by words. The core of kendo lies in firm belief, but the phrase, the ultimate in kendo, was like some invisible shackles, tightly trapping his mind, making him eager to know the answer. Seeing this, Karen smiled secretly in her heart, but remained calm on the outside. He narrowed his eyes slightly, as if he was recalling some profound truth, and his tone was slow and calm. The ultimate in swordsmanship lies neither in the sword nor in skills. The real ultimate lies beyond the sword. Beyond the sword? Mahawk repeated this sentence, frowning slightly, seeming to understand. That's right, Karen continued, with an unfathomable expression in his expression. When you take the sword as the center, technique as the root, and mind as the bridge, you will eventually find that the sword is just a tool and the person is just a skin. When you transcend these limitations, you will understand that the true way of kendo is a kind of detachment, that is a state without a sword is better than a state with a sword. No sword is better than a sword. Mahawk whispered, his fingers clenched, unconsciously, and he said suspiciously, But you just said that swordsmanship is the relationship between man and sword. It should be the relationship between heart and mind. The resonance? The different ideas were switched so quickly that Mahak frowned slightly and fell into thinking. Karen smiled unhurriedly and her tone became more leisurely. That's the fun thing about kendo, isn't it? All contradictions are the only way to the ultimate. The resonance between heart and mind is the foundation of kendo, and transcending this resonance is the sublimation of kendo. Mahak was silent for a moment, looking up at Karen, a sharp light bursting out of his eyes, as if he had captured some indescribable truth. You mean, every stage of swordsmanship has its truth, and there is no conflict between the truths. It's just that the higher you stand, the more you see? The more he talked, the more excited he became, and his whole person was like a madman. No, what did you realize? Karen didn't expect that the metaphysical theory he casually talked about could make him imagine an epic battle in his heart. Karen coughed dryly and nodded slightly. That's right. There is no single answer to swordsmanship. Every swordsman is exploring his own way of swordsmanship. The resonance of heart and mind is for control. The ultimate beyond the sword is detachment, and after detachment, you may find that the essence of kendo is just a way to return to the ordinary. Advertisement. After listening to this, Mahak slowly exhaled, and the complex emotions in his eyes gradually calmed down, as if he was re-examining everything about himself. A return to the ordinary, interesting way of saying it. Karen looked at this scene and couldn't help but smile to herself. This is the power of theory. No matter whether it is true or false, as long as it is mysterious enough, it can make people ponder for a long time. Mahak raised his head, his eyes sharp again, but this time they were unusually soft. Karen spoke softly and continued. Kendo itself is an endless road, and everyone's pace and direction are different. Perhaps, when you truly understand your own kendo, that is the starting point of ultimate. Mahak stared at Karen and was silent for a long time before slowly speaking. Karen, your views shock me. Your swordsmanship may not have reached its peak yet, but your understanding of swords has surpassed many people. Karen couldn't help complaining. Is this flattering? I'm just talking nonsense. But he remained calm on the surface and said in a calm tone. Kendo is not to shock others, but to find yourself. If my words inspire you, it is because your sword heart is clear enough. Mahak nodded, seeming to take these words to heart. He slowly stood up straight and slowly put yi back into the scabbard. Karen, his tone was low but full of respect, maybe next time we meet, we will talk with swords instead of words. Seeing that Mahak had shown an unprecedented seriousness towards him, Karen felt that the time had come, so he smiled slightly, with a hint of temptation in his tone. Mahak, you just mentioned that the next meeting will discuss swordsmanship, but I want to ask, are you really satisfied with your current journey of swordsmanship? Mahak's brows moved slightly, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Satisfied? What do you mean? Karen looked at him, his eyes like a deep pool. Your swordsmanship has reached its peak, and you are known as the strongest swordsman in the world. But can such an invincible state really allow you to feel the direction of progress? Or, has the art of swordsmanship come to a standstill? Mahak's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He was silent for a moment and then said, Invincibility is indeed a kind of loneliness, but it does not mean that my swordsmanship has no direction. Seeing that Mahak looked relaxed, Karen continued to increase the firepower. His tone was low and contagious, as if every word carried some irresistible power. Mahak, you are recognized as the pinnacle of swordsmanship in this era. You stand alone at a height that no one can reach. But is the lonely peak really the end of swordsmanship? Chapter 303 Hawkeye Mahak Advertisement. Mahak's name was forged through countless battles. With his unparalleled swordsmanship, he conquered all challengers, whether they were pirates or marines. Every victory he wins is an affirmation of his strength and a perfect annotation of his swordsmanship philosophy. However, along with these glory are challenges and opponents that are gradually disappearing. When everyone looked up to him and tried to follow his footsteps, he found himself standing on the top of an endless lonely peak. In this world where the strong are respected, Mahak is not only a symbol of swordsmanship, but also the embodiment of strength and independence. He refused to rely on any force and chose to travel the great route alone. This was not only his pursuit of freedom, but also his determination of his own swordsmanship path. This kind of purity makes him an out-and-out believer of the sword, living by the sword and taking the sword as his companion. However, no matter how powerful the swordsmanship is, it still needs opponents of the same level to contrast and sublimate it. As his swordsmanship improved, he found that there were fewer and fewer people who could compete with him. Cutting off the opponent's blade countless times has resulted in not only unparalleled fame, but also deeper loneliness. What he needs is not just an admirer or a challenger, but an opponent who can stand in front of him and truly force him to go all out. This desire is most intuitively reflected in his duel with the red-haired Shanks. In the plot, Mahak, who has never drawn his sword against the weak, is willing to fight Shanks again and again, because Shanks is one of the few people who can understand and match his swordsmanship. After Shanks lost his left arm, Mahak stopped dueling him. This was not disrespectful to Shanks, but because in his eyes, a sword duel was not flawless, and he also lost his only true swordsman friend. The peak of loneliness, the end of the sword. Mahak repeated Karen's words in a low voice. These words were like throwing a stone into a lake, causing ripples in Mahak's heart. Mahawk frowned slightly, but he remained calm and said in a deep voice. The path of a swordsman is inherently lonely. The corners of Karen's mouth raised slightly. He knew that Mahawk's heart had begun to waver, but just being touched was not enough. He needs a more powerful reason to completely hit the world's #1 swordsman's loneliness and desire. Therefore, he adjusted his tone to be deeper, yet still casual, like a wise man who has experienced the world and a fellow-minded person. Advertisement: yes, the path of a swordsman is inherently lonely. But a lonely road does not mean that you can only walk alone. Mahawk, have you ever thought that the true way of swordsmanship is not at the peak of loneliness, but in the process of constantly pursuing the ultimate? Mahawk's brows moved slightly, and there was a hint of thought in his eyes. Karen took advantage of the situation and continued. You said that invincibility is a kind of loneliness, but I want to ask, are you really invincible? Or is it because you have not found a real opponent that you mistakenly think you are invincible? What do you mean? Mahawk stared at Karen, with a bit of complexity in his eyes. He spoke slowly, with a calm tone but a hint of coldness. Karen, your idea of kendo is really refreshing to me. Resonance between heart and mind. Extreme beyond the sword. These ideas are profound enough, even let me re-examine myself. But, his voice suddenly paused, and the black knife, yi, buzzed slightly in his hand, as if in response to his emotions. But just theory is not enough for me to recognize your level as a swordsman. Mahawk's words are like a blade, going straight to the core. The essence of swordsmanship is not words, but actions. It is a life and death contest between blades. Karen smiled slightly, already expecting Mahawk to say this. You are right, no matter how advanced the theory is, it is just a theory. The truth of swordsmanship will eventually be revealed in the intersection of blades. He slowly pulled out the hidden edge, and a faint cold light emitted from the sword. I'll show you what real swordsmanship is. As long as you can break free from my sword skills, you win. Interesting, it seems you are planning to use that trick. Mahawk naturally knew that Karen had a very weird swordsmanship, but he didn't think he would lose to Karen. As the world's #1 swordsman, all the moves he faced, no matter whether they were weird or wonderful, could not shake his rock-like sword heart in the end. The corners of Mahawk's mouth raised slightly, with a hint of fighting intent in his eyes. He slowly raised the black knife, yi, pointed the blade at Karen, and said in a low voice. Karen, come on, defeat me and I will join you. Mahawk took the lead. Advertisement: the black knife, yi, turned into a black stream of light and hit Karen's chest. That sword seemed ordinary, but it contained all the essence of his swordsmanship, including strength, speed, and skill, all reaching the extreme. The terrifying sword pressure swept across all directions like a storm, and the surrounding trees were broken under the sword pressure. Is this really swordsmanship? Smoker opened his mouth wide. He deserves to be the world's best swordsman. Even from such a distance, I can feel that sharp and unstoppable momentum. Tetsulo was equally stunned. Even Bullet and Moria, who were fighting in the distance, were attracted by this sword. They seemed to have forgotten their own battle and stopped to look at the center of the sword energy confrontation. Karen stood in the center of the storm pressed by Mahawk's sword, with a calm look on his face. He held the Zhangfeng tightly and whispered, as expected, you are indeed the world's best swordsman. It's a pity that you are destined to lose in this battle. He didn't want to use it to be 100% unarmed, but if he wanted to completely convince Mahawk, then Karen had to show a strength that the other party couldn't understand. As for whether it is swordsmanship to be caught with bare hands 100% of the time, why doesn't it count? Anyway, in Karen's understanding, as long as it relies on sword moves, it is swordsmanship. Mahawk's black sword, yi, swept over like a tsunami. The power of the sword almost solidified the surrounding air, and even the ground began to crack. Karen was like a still rock, his eyes were focused and deep, and his hidden edge was raised slightly, as if there was no resistance at all. Just when yi was less than an inch away from him, Karen moved. Just a sword. Look at the sword. There was no bells and whistles. Karen just raised his sword in the air, and all Mahawk's sword moves disappeared in an instant. When he reacted again, the supreme sharp knife, yi, in his hand had been thrown aside. As a swordsman, as the world's greatest swordsman, he actually dropped the sword in his hand. And he knelt down in front of Karen in such a weird and funny posture. Mahawk raised his head and looked blankly at Karen, who was looking down at him. I lost. Chapter 304 Bullet TV's Moria advertisement. That guy Mahawk actually lost. Here, Mariah opened his eyes wide. He had seen how terrifying Mahawk was, and even he himself had no chance of winning against Mahawk. Damn it, why is this Marine so powerful? And this guy, if I remember correctly, isn't he the long-lost, Devil's descendant, Bullet? Why is he in Marine's camp? Mariah murmured to himself, looking at Karen for a while, then at Mahawk, and finally focused on Bullet. Aren't you a member of the Roger Pirates? Why do you help Marine? Bullet looked away from Karen and glanced at Mariah, who had a shocked face. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his tone contained a hint of contempt and indifference. Mariah, you are still the coward who lives in failure. In the past, you were crushed by Kaido. Now, you don't even have the ability to see the situation clearly. Moria's eyes suddenly shrank, and his breathing quickened. In my mind, past memories came flooding back. Kaido's cold face, his own misfortune, the humiliating days spent in the dungeon, and the pain of watching his body gradually deform and lose its former majesty. Bullet, what do you know? Mariah gritted his teeth and growled, you have also had your moments of failure. Why are you pointing fingers at me here? Bullet snorted coldly, his tone even colder. Yes, failure is not terrible. What is terrible is that you don't even have the courage to face failure. Look at how you look now. You can't even control your own body, and you still want to take revenge on Kaido? It's ridiculous. When Moria heard the name, Kaido, his heart felt like it was stabbed hard. His hands clenched involuntarily, his nails digging into his palms. He looked at Bullet, his eyes full of mixed emotions. Anger, unwillingness, and deep inferiority. What do you mean? Moria lowered his voice, with a hint of trembling. Do you think I am not qualified for revenge? Bullet was unmoved, his eyes were like daggers, and he looked directly at Mariah. I can see clearly that you do not have the qualifications, but you still have a chance. If you want to become stronger, you must learn to follow the truly strong. Then step by step, we will become the strongest. Strong? Mariah subconsciously looked at Karen, his eyes full of hesitation and struggle. Advertisement, you mean him? That Marine? Even Mihawk was defeated by him? Not only Mihawk, but I also lost at his hands. Bullet nodded, his tone low and firm. Karen's power has surpassed the so-called definition of a strong person. The strength he has shown so far is still just the tip of the iceberg. I see the shadow of Roger in him. Only by defeating Karen, only then can I become the strongest. As he spoke, he looked at Mo Lee fiercely and said loudly. Mariah, if you are still addicted to the past and try to challenge Kaido with your own little strength, you will only die a worse death. Moria was silent. He lowered his head, looked at his increasingly bloated body, and recalled his former high-spirited appearance, with deep self-doubt in his eyes. He and Kaido are both strong men of the Ghost Clan. In order to compete for the strongest, he lost to Kaido, but in the end he failed. The price of failure was that in order to strengthen his own strength, all 1,000 of his crew members died at the hands of Kaido. And he himself was imprisoned in the dungeon by Kaido and suffered humiliation. As a strong man in this sea, he also has his own pride. He can accept death, but he cannot accept being insulted. Therefore, for his great cause of revenge, he went to West Blue and sailed out the largest pirate ship in the world. Then he collects the corpses of strong men everywhere to expand his zombie army, just so that one day he can complete his revenge. Kaido, he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. Do I really have a chance? Bullet looked at him indifferently. The opportunity is right in front of you. By following Karen, you may still find the true meaning of power. Otherwise, just like in the past, you will always be stepped on. Moria's fists were clenched and he was struggling in his mind. He was unwilling to accept his failure, and he was unwilling to admit that he was so insignificant. But reality ruthlessly told him that Bullet's words were correct. The Karen in front of him may be his only hope. Impossible. Moria suddenly raised his head, a trace of madness flashed in his eyes. I won't give in to anyone easily, Bullet. If you really think that following the strong is the only way out, then prove to me how much better you are than me. Bullet sneered. Very good, it seems you haven't completely fallen yet. Then I'll let you understand how big the power gap is. Advertisement, Bullet, you are just a beast relying on brute strength. Moria growled, look how I crush you. Moria took the lead. He controlled the shadow to turn into dozens of sharp tentacles, attacking Bullet from all directions. Every shadow is as swift as a lion majesty, trying to trap Bullet's movements. Bullet didn't care. He clenched his fists, and the armed domineering energy surging throughout his body was instantly released, forming a black barrier. When the shadow tentacles touched this layer of domineering energy, they made a harsh friction sound, but they were still unable to break through. Your moves are just as weak as you were back then. Bullet said coldly. He punched hard, and a surge of domineering energy mixed with violent shockwaves swept out, scattering all Moria's shadow tentacles. Moria backed away continuously, his eyes full of shock. This is just the beginning, Bullet roared, exerted force on his feet, and rushed towards Moria in an instant. The speed was so fast that the air made a sharp tearing sound. Moria was caught off guard and could only use a shadow warrior to change positions and narrowly avoid Bullet's punch. However, the aftermath of the punch still hit his flank, knocking him several dozen meters away. Hateful. Moria stood up from the ruins, his eyes becoming even crazier. He begins to use the true power of the shadow fruit. Shadow gathering place, Bullet, I will show you my limits. He roared, and countless shadows came from all around and merged into his body. His body began to expand, and his strength also increased significantly. Is this your limit? Bullet watched Moria's changes coldly, unmoved at all. He stretched out his hand, and the power of the combined fruit emerged from his palm. The steel and rubble on the ground flew up one after another, quickly forming a giant armor that covered Bullet's body. With the armor fully formed, Bullet transformed into a steel giant nearly 100 meters tall. Every step he took made the earth tremble. Chapter 305 Welcome to join us. Advertisement. Bullet is so powerful. Smoker looked at Bullet blankly. This was the first time he saw Bullet's ability to use the fusion fruit. He finally understood why Bullet always sighed when facing him. The previous emotional battles on the ship were really just small fights. Damn it, why are they all so strong? As is Karen, so is Bullet. Even this guy Tetsolo. At North Blue, he and Karen met Tetsolo together. At that time, Tetsolo could only be regarded as an ordinary person with considerable discernment. But now, in just a few months, after he obtained the golden fruit, Tetsolo's strength has almost soared. As Cullen's lieutenant, Smoker felt a lot of pressure. Not to mention, he glanced at Mihawk, who stood up. Even the world's best swordsman was about to join him. Then the pressure he faces will be even greater, Karen. Smoker clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white from the exertion. He lowered his head, his silver-white short hair covering his eyes, but his chest rose and fell violently, revealing his inner struggle and unwillingness. Why? He murmured to himself, his voice low but with a hint of imperceptible anger. His mind flashed to Cullen, Bullet, Tetsolo, and even Mihawk, who had just gone back on his feet. Each of them exudes the aura of a strong man, and every time they take action, there is a suffocating sense of oppression. And what about him? As Karen's adjutant, he seems so insignificant in this arena of powerful men. Is this really all I can do? Smoker's voice was hoarse. He recalled the battles in the past, the scenes of confrontations with pirates. Every time, he thought he was strong enough, but the reality in front of him tore his pride into pieces again and again. Bullet's combined fruit made him feel powerless. Tetsolo's rapid rise in a short period of time made him feel the difficulty of catching up. And Karen, the man he always followed, but he always walked at a height that was beyond his reach. Karen is like this, Bullet is like this, even this guy Tetsolo. Smoker raised his head, and his eyes fell on those strong men again. He could feel that they all relied on their desire for power and their unremitting pursuit to reach this height. I can't stay here. Smoker clenched his hands and his eyes gradually became determined. He raised his head and stared at Karen in the distance. A strong fighting spirit burst out of his body, and his eyes shone with an unprecedented light. Advertisement, Karen, if you are the sky, then I will become the storm. No matter how difficult it is, I will catch up with you or even surpass you. I want to become stronger, stronger than anyone else. Boom. A huge shockwave lifted up rubble on the ground, and the air was filled with deafening explosions. Moria was knocked back by Bullet's punch, and his huge body slid on the ground for dozens of meters. He was breathing heavily, and the shadows on his body began to fall off. Bullet was unscathed. He slowly walked towards Moria, with deep sarcasm in his tone. That's it, Mariah, my enemy has never been a dabbler like you. A trace of despair flashed in Moria's eyes, but he gritted his teeth, roared and charged again. He concentrated all the shadows on his fists and smashed them hard against Bullet's chest. Bullet stood there, motionless. He easily blocked Moria's full blow with only one hand. Then, he raised his fist, covered it with armed domineering energy, and slammed it towards Moria. Boom! This punch completely smashed Moria into the ground, causing dust to fly. When the smoke dispersed, Mariah's figure had become blurry. He collapsed to the ground, and the shadows continued to overflow from his body, returning to his original form. Bullet stood in front of him, looking down at him coldly. Admit it, your current strength is not enough to revenge Kaido. Mariah gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with tears of humiliation. He lowered his head and said with difficulty, maybe, you were right. Bullet turned around and looked at Karen in the distance. Karen nodded slightly to him. He had already expected the battle between Bullet and Moria. Bullet took heavy steps and left the ruined battlefield. He didn't look at Moria again, as if all this was just a drill without any suspense. You are still a weakling after all, Moria. Bullet dropped the last words coldly. Real power lies not in accumulating shadows, but in breaking one's own boundaries. Mariah fell to the ground, his eyes empty. He clenched his fists, but found that he didn't even have the strength to stand up. What flashed in those eyes was not only humiliation, but also a deep helplessness. Advertisement, am I really qualified to take revenge? His voice was like a candle in the wind, barely audible. At this time, a voice came from the side, calm and with a hint of elusive majesty. Mariah, your problem is not failure, but that you have never learned to face failure. Moria looked up and saw Karen looking down at him condescendingly. There was no pity in those deep eyes, but there was no ridicule either. Failure is the only way for every strong person to grow. Karen said slowly, but a truly strong person will not torture himself in failure, but turn the lessons of failure into strength. Mariah's body trembled slightly, he raised his head and murmured. But, I have lost too much. Karen remained unmoved and his tone remained calm. What you have lost is far more than just your past crew and glory. What you lost is your pride and your belief as a strong man. Every word he said was like a heavy hammer, hitting the depths of Moria's soul. There was struggle in Moria's eyes. He wanted to refute, but found that he had no way to speak. The power of Bullet, you saw it, Karen continued. If you still cling to the past and continue to use shadows to build false self-confidence, then you will never be able to step into the realm of the strong. Moria was silent. His breathing gradually stabilized, and the memory fragments in his mind began to reorganize. He was once a high-spirited and strong man, a man who could face Kaido head-on. Why has he become like this now? Marine, Moria whispered, with a bit of hesitation in his voice. If I choose to change, do I really have a chance? Karen smiled slightly, with a trace of undeniable calmness. Opportunities always belong to those who are willing to change, but only if you leave behind the baggage of the past. Moria's eyes gradually became firm, he clenched his fists and nodded vigorously. I see. He stood up slowly, although his steps were staggering, he seemed extremely determined. Kaido. I will stand up again, and then use my own power to completely defeat you. Zhang Feng transformed into a bird and landed on Karen's shoulder, rubbing Karen's collar affectionately. Karen teased the bird with her fingers for a while, looked at Mihawk and Mariah, and said with a faint smile. Mihawk, Moria, welcome you to join us. Chapter 306 Banquet in the Castle. Advertisement. The banquet hall of Moria Castle is now completely new. The castle, which was once filled with a gloomy and depressing atmosphere, is now brightly lit, and the shadows on the walls are dispersed by the soft candlelight, replaced by laughter and a warm atmosphere. There is a huge long table in the center of the hall, which is filled with sumptuous food, barbecue, seafood, mountain delicacies, fine wines, everything you want, exuding an alluring aroma. Of course, none of these foods were cooked by Karen himself, let alone Sanji. Even though Karen has taught Sanji a lot of cooking skills, his cooking skills, well, are still improving. Karen sat on the main seat with a faint smile on her face. He raised the wine glass in his hand and said to the people sitting around the table. Today, all of us have gone through a big battle, no matter the enemy or friend. I hope that from this moment on, there will be only friends here. Smoker leaned on the back of the chair, picked up the wine glass and drank it in one gulp, then slammed the glass on the table with a crisp sound. He laughed and said, That's it. A battle is a battle. A banquet is a banquet. Come on, give me another glass. Moria sat aside with some restraint. His expression was slightly complicated, but in the cheerful atmosphere, there was still a smile on his lips unconsciously. Of course, you can drink whatever you want. This is my territory, and I have enough control over all the drinks and food. Mariah suddenly relaxed a lot, stood up with the wineglass in his hand, and waved his hand slightly exaggeratedly, as if to show his master's style. His words caused everyone to burst into laughter, and even Perona, who was sitting silently in the distance, couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. For her who has always been alone since childhood, the atmosphere of the banquet made her sincerely happy. This kind of life is not bad. Suddenly she screamed strangely, damn it, that little cake is mine. Here, Sugar has already stuffed the cake that belongs to Perona into her mouth, and she retorts while swallowing. Whatever is yours, whoever eats it first belongs to whom. Hateful. Not to be outdone, Perona grabbed the fruit next to the sugar. Sugar quickly protected the plate, with a proud smile on her lips, and deliberately took a bite of the peach that Perona had been staring at for a long time. Well, it's so sweet. It's even more delicious than your little cake. Childish devil. Perona was so angry that she stamped her feet and had to quickly sweep away the desserts around her. Ha ha ha, it's really embarrassing, Perona. Moria shook her head fondly, and the smile on her lips became more obvious. In addition to fighting on this sea, the pirate's favorite pastime is to hold banquets. When having a banquet, the more people there are and the more lively it is, the better. Advertisement. At this time, Bullet suddenly grabbed a roast chicken on the table and threw it directly towards Mihawk. The previous battle between Karen and Mihawk had long made him feel itchy, and now he seemed to want to stir up some sparks through the lively atmosphere of the banquet. However, Mihawk just turned sideways slightly, and the roast chicken crossed his shoulder and flew straight to Tetsuro next to him. There was a flash of golden light, Tetsuro waved his hand, and the chicken legs hovered in the air, and then landed steadily on his plate. Disrespectful behavior is unbecoming of this elegant party, Bullet. Tetsuro showed a playful smile as he cut off the chicken legs. Huh, elegant? Bullet sneered and stood up suddenly. Then let's have some fun. He directly picked up the wine barrel on the table, raised his head and drank most of the barrel, then put it down suddenly, grinned, looked at everyone with provocative eyes, and shouted. Come on, anyone who doesn't drink is a coward. The banquet hall suddenly became noisy, and everyone raised their glasses in response to Bullet's challenge. The aroma of wine overflowed, and the laughter became even more lively. At this time, Karen knocked on the table lightly. The sound was not loud, but it suddenly attracted everyone's attention. He smiled slightly and said, Ha ha ha, since it is a banquet, how can we miss the highlight? As he spoke, he looked at Uda, who was laughing and discussing something with Manchili with great interest. Monet on the side was also listening carefully, covering his mouth and chuckling from time to time. Feeling Karen's sight, Uda blinked. The highlight? Perona and Sugar stopped fighting and raised their heads to look at Karen, a trace of anticipation flashing in their eyes. Yes, we will invite our musician Uda to give us a talent show next. Karen took the lead in applauding and looked at Uda with encouraging eyes. Uda smiled slightly, stood up gracefully, and started her performance without any stage fright. The music slowly sounded, and Uda slowly spoke. In these years, alone, the wind has passed and the rain has gone. Ahem. Karen coughed dryly. Yes, of course he taught Uda this music. At this time, Uda sang it in Japanese, which was quite enjoyable. What song is this? Moria's eyes widened, confusion written on his face. Advertisement, why doesn't it sound like our ocean tunes? Karen smiled and waved his hand. This is a song from a distant place. It has a simple melody but profound meaning. Uda's performance is already very good, isn't it? Everyone nodded, and Perona spoke first. Definitely, this song feels special. Although I didn't understand some of the words she sang, it actually moved me a little bit. Karen smiled slightly and continued. This song tells the story of persisting in dreams in the wind and rain. Even in the face of loneliness and challenges, you can move forward bravely, just like those of us who are drifting on the sea. Tetsuro lightly knocked on the table and said with emotion. Not bad, not bad. This kind of song is just right for people like us. Dreams are not something you can have just by shouting. Mahawk lowered his head and took a sip of wine. A glimmer of approval seemed to flash in his eyes. He opened his mouth and said, simple melody, clean emotion, this is the real art. Bullet then laughed and stood up. Dream? Persistence? Of course it is important. But in my opinion, only strength is the thing that can truly protect dreams. He slammed his fist on the table, causing the wine glass to jump. Karen glared at him. How rude. What kind of art do you know? Ha ha ha. Let's leave art to you and appreciate it slowly. I just want wine and fighting. Bullet laughed unbridled, raised the barrel and took another swig. Next, Bullet and Smoker started a competition to see who could drink more, while Tetsulo and Moria started a duel of who can tell the more outrageous joke. Every joke triggered bursts of laughter, and even the former zombie servants in the castle were redecorated to look cute and funny and became waiters, carrying plates back and forth. Karen leaned back in her chair, holding a glass of red wine in her hand. He did not participate in the noisy games, but watched everything quietly. His eyes were soft and there was a slight smile on his lips. This is the scene he wanted. After the battle, all conflicts become peaceful and former enemies can become friends. The party lasted until late at night. After drinking and eating, people dispersed in twos and threes. Some were taking naps on chairs in the hall, while others went to the terrace to enjoy the cool night breeze. Karen stood on the edge of the terrace, looking at the distant moonlight shining on the magnificent sea, with a trace of deep thinking flashing in his eyes. Chapter 307 Another Legend. Advertisement. The night sky is clear, dotted with stars, and the cool sea breeze blows by, bringing a touch of freshness. Karen glanced down at the wine glass in his hand and shook it casually, making the crimson liquid sparkle in the moonlight. At this time, the sound of footsteps came softly. What are you still thinking about? Mahawk's voice is flat. Karen did not look back and smiled faintly. I was just wondering which one is more important, dreams or strength. Mahawk stopped next to him, holding a glass of wine in his hand and looking towards the sea in the distance. This shouldn't be a problem. Dreams are the heart and strength is the blade. Both are indispensable. Without strength, dreams will only come to nothing. But if you only have strength and no dreams, you will be nothing more than a walking corpse after all. Karen chuckled upon hearing this. It doesn't sound like something you would say. Then, he turned around, looked at Mahawk, and asked, what is your dream? Mahawk was silent for a moment, with a cold look in his eyes. Dream? Maybe it's to pursue the supreme swordsmanship, or maybe it's just to find an opponent worthy of my all-out efforts. Well, Karen nodded, then I am lucky enough to be the worthy person? Mahawk raised the corner of his mouth slightly, revealing a rare smile. Of course, if it weren't for your swordsmanship that impressed me, I wouldn't have stayed. The two looked at each other and smiled, then looked at the night sky in silence. After a long time, Karen suddenly said, by the way, do you know Shanks? Shanks? Mahawk thought for a while and asked, who is he? It seems that Mahawk doesn't know Shanks yet. It's also the year 1506 of the Hainan calendar. Although Karen has met Shanks, it can be seen from Guillaume's reaction that Shanks has not yet broken out in this sea at this time. Name. Of course Mahawk doesn't know Shanks, but that won't be the case in a few years. Karen nodded slightly, placed the wine glass on the stone railing of the terrace, raised his head and stared at the stars, with a meaningful smile on his lips. Shanks is a special guy. Karen's tone was somewhat meaningful. Speaking of it, from the time he sailed in this sea, his only failure was at the hands of Shanks. At that time, he had just graduated from the military academy and it was also the first time he faced conquerors. Thinking of his original embarrassed appearance, Karen smiled softly. When we meet again, the situation will be different. Mahawk raised his eyebrows slightly, with a little more interest in his eyes. It sounds like he's not bad at all. Not only is his strength not bad, but his dreams and ambitions are also not small. Karen chuckled, maybe one day, he will become a rival on par with you. Mahawk was silent for a moment, his eyes returned to the sea. Really? Then I'm somewhat looking forward to it. Advertisement. But that's a story for another day. I'm only interested in you now, Karen. Mahawk followed Karen's example and placed the wine glass on the stone railing on the terrace, staring into Karen's eyes. After you've had enough wine and food, it's time to discuss kendo with me. Karen was stunned and rolled his eyes. Although Mahawk is not like Bullet who only wants to fight, His pursuit of swordsmanship is no less, or even more persistent. Karen shook her head helplessly and sighed softly. Mahawk, I just went through a big battle and the banquet just ended. You didn't even give me time to digest the food? Mahawk was unmoved. His eyes were like swords and he stared at Karen coldly. When does a true swordsman need an excuse? Karen was amused by his firm attitude and sighed secretly. This is not possible. One bullet is enough to give me a headache. Here comes another Mahawk. Karen has already foreseen his miserable life in the future.
Ahem, how about you compete with Bullet? I assume he would be very happy to fight you.
Mahawk remained unmoved. That big guy? Right. He is not a swordsman. I am only interested in those with strong swordsmanship. Bullet probably never thought that one of his would be disliked by others.
Well, Karen rubbed his head with a headache. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something, and a slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth.
Speaking of this, I remembered that there seems to be a strong man here who can discuss swordsmanship with you. Mahawk frowned slightly and said slowly, I can't think of a second person besides him. Ha ha ha, that's because you don't understand Moria. Karen's smile was a bit sly. Mariah? Thinking of Moria's appearance, Mahawk raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't think Moria was a master of swordsmanship. Come with me. Karen showed a mysterious smile, and the two returned to the banquet hall together. In the banquet hall, the lights were still bright, and Moria was laughing triumphantly, holding a glass of wine in his hand, arguing with Tetsolo about who was better at the last joke. Advertisement Karen led Mahawk straight to a small table near the stage. Mariah is not just the crazy pirate in your impression, Karen said as he walked, with a hint of meaning in his tone. He may not be known for his swordsmanship, but he has a treasure on his ship that I think you will be very interested in. Mahawk's expression remained calm, but there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. Treasure? Karen stopped, pointed in an inconspicuous direction, and said softly. Look over there. Mahawk followed his gaze, and among the zombie servants, there was a zombie warrior with bandages all over his body, a blue scarf, and a blue abdominal belt with a swirl pattern around his waist. He was quietly sitting with his hands on the handle of the knife, his head lowered, as if sleeping. This is Moria's treasure, a true swordsman, Ryoma. Mahawk's eyes narrowed slightly, and he could feel the distinctive aura exuding from the zombie warrior. Although the person in front of him seems lifeless, the hidden sword intent is impossible to ignore. Ryoma. There was a hint of disbelief in Mahawk's tone. Shimotsuki Ryoma. As a fellow swordsman, Mahawk has naturally heard of the name of this legendary swordsman. Karen smiled and nodded. It seems that you have heard of his name. According to rumors, Ryoma was a swordsman during his lifetime. He was the master of Dakue sword Shu Shui, and was famous for his swordsmanship. Mariah used his special ability to embed the shadow of a strong man into this corpse, giving it new life. Although it is not a living person, it has inherited all the swordsmanship skills it had during its lifetime. Mahawk's eyes gradually calmed down. He raised his fingers and gently clasped Hideaway. In that case, let me see if the legendary swordsman can stand the test of time. Karen shrugged, acting like it had nothing to do with him. You are free to do whatever you want. I'm going to have a drink first. By the way, Moria may not agree with you destroying his treasure, so remember to take it easy. Mahawk didn't answer. He slowly pulled out the black knife, and with a flash of cold light, the atmosphere in the entire banquet hall instantly froze. The zombie warrior Ryoma seemed to have sensed this strong killing intent. He slowly raised his head, and there was a faint cold light in his dark, empty eyes. The entire banquet hall fell into a dead silence, and everyone stopped and stared at this scene. Moria was stunned for a moment, and then shouted. Hey, Karen. Mahawk. What are you doing? My dragon horse is not meant for sword duels with others. Karen spread his hands and said with a smile. Don't worry, Mahawk just wants to compare notes and give him some face. Don't be too stingy. Moria was about to retort, but Ryoma had already stood up. He slowly drew out the sharp sword Shu Shui from his waist. The blade was pitch black and extremely sharp. It reflected the lights in the banquet hall and cast a strange sheen. It seems that he has agreed. Chapter 308 The Alternation of Power on Nine Snakes Island. Advertisement Windless Zone, Nine Snake Island. On the competition ground on Nine Snake Island, the scorching sun burned the ground, and the atmosphere of battle was suffocating. The surrounding Nine Snakes warriors formed a circle and stared at the two people in the center of the field with burning eyes. Boya Hancock stood in the middle of the competition arena, her figure looking tall and elegant under the scorching sun. Her long black hair fluttered in the wind, and her scarlet cloak created wavy ripples behind her. She raised her chin slightly and glanced at her opponent with cold eyes, as if she had declared the winner. Although she is young, every move she makes reveals a majesty that is hard to ignore, like a born ruler. On the other side is the old but majestic Grandma, Guluoliosa. Although she is no longer young, Groliosa still exudes the majesty that has shocked the daughter island for many years. Hancock stood in front of Guluoliosa. His momentum was like a rainbow, and the conqueror's domineering power in his body had reached its peak. It's one thing how many people the conqueror's haki can suppress, but if it can't be completely controlled, it's just a form of brute force. Guluoliosa held the scepter, with a hint of relief in her eyes, but more serious. Then, she took a deep breath and said loudly, "Come on, Boya Hancock, let me see your strength. Defeat me, and you will be the new Empress of Nine Snakes Island." Hancock smiled lightly and looked at Croliosa with disdain. "Mother-in-law, today I will use my strength to prove that I am the new Empress of Nine Snakes Island." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the air shook, and there was a sudden loud noise. Boom! The moment she displayed Conqueror's domineering power, the entire venue fell into a brief silence. Her domineering power spread like a torrent, and even the air seemed to freeze. That kind of coercion made the surrounding audience feel as if their chests were pressed by a huge boulder, and no one dared to look directly into her eyes. Too strong. Such a snake lady is simply invincible. Advertisement. With such strength and beauty, she is truly a born empress. I heard that Lady Snake once defeated the monster Gorgon in the Central Sea. She is so powerful. But it seems that because of this incident, Lady Snake Lady was cursed by Gorgon. Petrified eyes grew out of Lady Snake Lady's back. Anyone who sees Lady Snake Lady's back will be petrified. The Gorgon of the Central Sea is a monster that can swallow even ships. Anyone who can defeat it must be an unparalleled warrior. Only such a person can become the Empress of our Nine Snakes Island. The Nine Snake Island warriors who were watching were whispering, but everyone's eyes were firmly fixed on the battle in the field. In the center of the competition arena, the confrontation between Hancock and Croliosa was about to begin. Croliosa's eyes were filled with relief, but they were also sharp. She gently raised the scepter in her hand and swung a void strike at an extremely fast speed. There was a sharp sound of breaking wind in the air, and the power condensed into substantial pressure, approaching Hancock. Facing such a powerful offensive, Hancock just turned around slightly, her scarlet cloak set off an elegant arc, and she dodged the attack with incredible speed. At the same time, she raised her slender fingers and lightly scratched the ground. A small crack began to spread from her feet, accompanied by a shuddering breath. "I don't need to prove my strength." Hancock's voice was cold and firm. She took a step slowly, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. "The existence of my concubine is the future of Nine Snake Island." In an instant, the domineering energy in the air suddenly condensed. She raised her finger slightly and pointed at Guluoliosa, like a king issuing a judgment order. The powerful conqueror's domineering energy was like a raging sea wave, sweeping violently with her as the center, directly impacting the hearts of the onlookers. Plop. Some young warriors could not resist this momentum and knelt on their knees, their eyes full of reverence and shock. Croliosa stood firmly. Although she felt Hancock's conqueror's domineering power, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, revealing a smile of relief. At this time, it had only been half a year since Shaki defeated Hancock. The potential and strength displayed by Hancock were enough to make Croliosa speechless. Now Nine Snake Island can be saved. Thinking of this, Guluoliosa couldn't help but burst into tears. "Very good," advertisement Croliosa whispered, and then she suddenly waved her scepter. "She is indeed the chosen new Empress of Nine Snakes Island. She can already use conquerors to such an extent at such a young age. But the Empress is not only a symbol of power, she also needs wisdom and a heart to protect her people. Let me see if you can shoulder this responsibility." Before she finished speaking, her figure suddenly jumped up and hit Hancock with the scepter. Hancock raised his eyes, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the figure disappeared on the spot, and the next moment he appeared behind Guluoliosa. She kicked out a fragrant kick, with lightning speed, and the air was instantly kicked out, hitting Guluoliosa's back. Bang! The two powerful forces collided head-on, and the ground of the entire competition ground instantly collapsed, with countless rubbles flying. The aftermath of the battle set off gusts of wind, and the onlookers took a few steps back involuntarily, holding their hands in front of their faces and barely keeping their feet. After landing, Guluoliosa held the scepter steadily, her eyes full of pride and joy. "You win, Boya Hancock." She took back her scepter, her voice still loud. "From this moment on, you are the new Empress of Nine Snake Island." There was silence, then thunderous cheers erupted. "Lord Snake Princess is invincible. Long live the new Empress." Hancock stood in the center of the arena, her red cloak fluttering in the wind, and her cold face looked even more unapproachable under the scorching sun. She looked around and spoke slowly, her voice clearly reaching everyone's ears. "From today on, I will protect all of this in the name of the Empress of Nine Snakes Island. My power belongs to Nine Snakes." The soldiers cheered again, but Hancock turned around and looked towards the sea in the distance. The expression on his face softened for a rare moment at this moment. "I have become powerful enough, Lord Karen, when will you come to pick me up?" At this time, two figures, one green and one orange, handed the crown, which symbolized the highest status of Nine Snake Island, into Hancock's hands. "Elder sister. What are you thinking about?" Chapter 309. What exactly do you want? Advertisement. What are you thinking about? Mahawk casually threw the famous sword Kiyoshi in his hand towards Karen. Karen turned slightly and reached out to catch the famous knife. The moment his fingertips touched the handle of the knife, he could feel a strong sword intent coming toward his face. This sword was originally owned by Ryoma, the great swordsman of Wano. As one of the 21 skills of the great sword, Black Sword Shisui, It is not only a famous sword, but also a symbol of Kendo in Wano. He looked at the knife carefully, his eyes sweeping over the blade, as if he was thinking about something. After a moment of silence, he raised his head, with a calm and profound look in his eyes. I'm thinking about my next plan. In the current Shichibukai roster, Karen has summoned Bullet, Mihawk, and Mariah. In addition, the Fishman Tiger is already one of his own, and the crossed-out Don Quixote Doflamingo. He has already finished 5 of the 7 people in Shichibukai. The only remaining options are the Sand Crocodile in Alabasta, and the missing Monitor Lizard, Waja. Compared to the missing Waja, Crocodile is obviously a more suitable target. Unknowingly, Karen had gathered so many strong men from the sea around him. They were obviously not just chasing power or wealth, they all had their own unique goals and ambitions. In order to gather these selected pirates more efficiently, Karen planned to take only a few people and use the ability of the bird to complete the goal as soon as possible. With his current strength, he is no longer suitable to stay in the first half of the Grand Route. He quickly went to the more magnificent second half of the Grand Line, the New World. Only there can he better display his talents. He put down the autumn water in his hand and looked back at the sea in front of him. What do you think of this place? Mihawk was stunned for a moment and said slowly, not bad. Karen touched his chin. He almost forgot that the Kraikana Island where Mihawk lives is in the Devil's Triangle. I want to find the remaining 2 Shichibukai as soon as possible. Mihawk's eyes froze slightly, and after a moment of silence, he whispered. You want to gather all the 7 warlords of the sea around you? He knew that in the world government's plan, Karen was only an overseer. He was only the nominal leader of the 7 warlords of the sea, and the real control had never belonged to him. Karen also understands that he is just a pawn used by the world government to balance the situation and cover up the facts. There is a profound political calculation behind the so-called identity of the inspector. Advertisement: the world government does not want him to gain too much authority and prestige, especially not allowing him to occupy a pivotal position in the prestige of Marine and the entire world government like Garp and Zephyr. If he emerges and becomes a hero to Marine, the balance of power within Marine and the government will be shaken. And these are obviously not the results that the world government wants to see. Therefore, they chose to use the system of 7 warlords of the sea to put all the evil deeds of pirates on Karen's head. Countless evil deeds among these pirates may have been caused by circumstances beyond his control, and the government would only need to assign some significant blame and fault to Cullen, which would quickly damage his reputation. As long as he makes a mistake, even a small part of it, people's opinions will begin to change, and Karen's myth will no longer be glorious, and he may even become an enemy of Marine and the government. For most ordinary people, they don't care about the conspiracy or not. All they know is that as a Marine, Karen, as the supervisor of the 7 warlords of the sea, did not control the pirates well. What Karen wants to do is to use the name of this nominal inspector to firmly hold the entire 7 warlords of the sea in his hands. If he can gather all the Shichibukai into one camp, this power will be enough to shake the foundation of the world. Now that he has mastered the power of the 5 pirates, plus Crocodile and Hanazada, he only needs to complete the final puzzle to complete this ambitious plan. You should know the purpose of the world government's establishment of the 7 warlords of the sea. They are not doing it for us to conquer the new world. They just want to make more pirates continue civil war, so as to achieve the purpose of consuming the pirates. Although Mihawk is a pure swordsman, he still knows these goals that can be seen at a glance. After all, there are no fools among the pirates who can become the 7 warlords of the sea. Since they are not fools, they will not be easily beguiled by Marine to challenge the real overlord of the new world. The identity of the 7 warlords of the sea only allows them to better and legally plunder. The reason why Mihawk agreed to join was because he thought that those annoying Marines would not cause trouble for him. For this reason, he even took the initiative to find trouble with Marine, just to prevent Marine from messing with him. This is why he earned the title of Marine Hunter. The world government won't just watch you bring us all together. Karen turned around and chuckled. So, I plan to complete the tasks on the list quickly. You want to hide things from the world government? Mihawk stared into Karen's eyes, suddenly feeling like he couldn't see through Karen's heart. His impression of Karen is limited to the fact that he is an opponent worth fighting. In addition, Karen's dazzling identity is Marine hero, and the youngest general in history. What exactly do you want? Hancock, look at this. At the palace banquet on Nine Snake Island, Guluoliosa held a newspaper and spread it out. Advertisement: because we are in a windless zone and isolated from the outside world, it is very difficult to obtain newspapers and external information. Groliosa pointed to the headlines and read out the headlines. Marine is developing a new type of warship, and the windless zone barrier is about to be breached. She spoke in a heavy tone. This means that the barrier we rely on for survival may fail, and Nine Snake Island will be exposed to the enemy's sight. Hancock frowned slightly, but still maintained a proud posture. New warship? Even if Marine can break through, they can't easily shake the power of Nine Snake Island. But that's not the worst. Groliosa continued. Marine also formed the 7 warlords of the sea, an alliance of powerful pirates. They want to use the power of these pirates to maintain order at sea. Hancock, this is an opportunity. If you become a Shichibukai, you can achieve a stable situation for our Kuji Island. Hancock sneered after hearing this, his tone full of contempt. Let me become Marine's pawn? Don't even think about it, my pride will not allow me to succumb to the world government. Gloriosa sighed and handed the entire newspaper to Hancock. I know you are arrogant, but this is not a personal matter. This is for the future of the entire Nine Snakes Island. Please take a serious look at it. That's enough, I am the Emperor of Nine Snake Island. Besides, even if it causes the destruction of the country, I will be forgiven by everyone because I am as beautiful as a fairy. Hancock put his hands on his hips and leaned back slightly, showing an arrogant expression, with confidence and arrogance shining in his eyes. However, she still took the newspaper and briefly read it. When her eyes glanced at a name, the movements in her hands stopped. The newspaper read, "The gathering of the 7 warlords of the sea will be completed by marine hero Cullen. Karen." Hancock's eyes trembled slightly, and there was a huge wave in his heart. Gloriosa noticed Hancock's strangeness and asked doubtfully, "What's wrong? Do you know this person?" Hancock quickly put away his emotions and calmly Kaido. "I don't know you, but I suddenly became interested in the 7 warlords of the sea you mentioned.